Most people know the names Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. Fewer realize that before these gods became familiar figures in art and literature, they began as something far simpler: quiet, shapeless forces believed to reside in fields, doorways, storms, and even the boundaries of a growing city. Roman mythology did not start as a set of stories about dramatic personalities. It emerged from centuries of small rituals, political decisions, cultural exchanges, and the gradual merging of countless traditions into one of the most influential religious systems in world history. Long before Rome became a city, long before senators debated on the Capitoline Hill or legions marched across the Mediterranean, the people living on the Italian peninsula were already shaping the ideas that would later become Roman religion. These early communities had no temples carved from marble, no epic poems about gods arguing on mountaintops, and no clear pantheon with familiar names. Their religious world was much quieter and far more local. It was built from the landscape around them, from household rituals, and from the belief that invisible forces shaped every part of life. Archaeologists trace the earliest religious practices of Italy to the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age, roughly between the 2nd millennium BCE and the early 1st millennium BCE. During this period, small communities of Latin, Sabine, Etruscan, and other Italic peoples lived in scattered settlements across hills, valleys, and river plains. They were farmers, shepherds, and small-scale traders. For them, the world felt full of unseen presences that could influence crops, health, fertility, and safety. These beings were not gods in the later mythological sense. They were noumena, a Latin word for powerful but largely wordless spirits associated with actions, forces, or places. A noumen might be linked to the moment of planting seeds, the act of opening a door, or the boundary line around a home. Early Italians did not imagine these spirits in human form. There were no carved statues or elaborate origin stories. Instead, people recognized the existence of forces that needed proper respect. Performing the correct ritual at the correct time was far more important than imagining what the spirit looked like. This practical approach would remain a defining feature of Roman religion for centuries. Among these early communities, agriculture played a central role, and with it came rituals tied to the cycles of planting and harvest. Festivals and offerings were made to ensure good rains, healthy livestock, and protection from disease or drought. These rituals were not written down. They were passed orally from one generation to the next, woven into everyday tasks. Even later, when Rome developed a powerful state religion, many of these older agricultural rites continued, sometimes barely changed. The early Italians also honored the spirits of their ancestors. Families believed that deceased relatives watched over the household, provided guidance, and protected property and lineage. Maintaining harmony with these ancestral spirits was essential. This respect for family tradition would later appear in the Roman belief in the lares and penates, the household gods who guarded the home. But in these early centuries, the idea was simpler. The dead remained connected to the living through ritual remembrance, offerings, and a sense of ongoing responsibility. Different Italic groups brought their own traditions into this shared landscape. The Sabines, for example, lived in the mountains northeast of later Rome. They were known for strict moral customs and a strong sense of community duty. The Latins lived in the plains and hills around what would one day become the city of Rome, forming small villages often centered on defensible hilltops. The Etruscans, to the north, developed more complex cities earlier than their neighbors and practiced highly structured forms of divination. All these peoples influenced each other through trade, intermarriage, warfare, and shared cultural practices. The idea that the sky itself contained divine power was already widespread in this period. Storms, winds, and lightning seemed to express the will of a powerful presence. Later, Romans would identify this divine authority as Jupiter, king of the gods. But in these early centuries, there was no single name or story attached to the sky spirit. Instead, people understood the sky as a force of protection and judgment. When lightning struck, It marked a boundary or delivered a warning. When the rains returned after drought, people gave thanks through simple offerings of grain, fruit, or wine. Mars, who later became known as a god of war, began very differently. Early Italians saw him as a protector of fields and livestock. Conflict between villages certainly existed, but warfare was not the earliest focus of Mars. His role as a guardian of agriculture makes sense when considering the needs of small, rural communities. Protecting crops and herds meant protecting survival itself. The early religious world of Italy also included spirits connected to rivers, forests, and springs. Natural features were not simply parts of the landscape. They were living powers that could help or harm. Sacred groves were common gathering places long before temples appeared. At these sites, people made offerings, prayed for help, and marked important communal occasions. These groves remained central even in later Roman religion, where certain trees and springs were believed to house divine forces. From the perspective of early communities, religion was not separate from daily life. It shaped decisions about planting and harvesting, marriage and burial, travel and warfare. People believed that proper rituals maintained balance in the world. If something went wrong, crop failure, sickness, or a natural disaster, it was assumed that someone had failed to honor a particular spirit or had neglected an essential rite. This belief in the necessity of correct ritual practice would remain a core feature of Roman religion even at the height of the empire. By the early first millennium BCE, these small Italic communities were forming more stable settlements. Among them were villages on the hills where Rome would later rise. These settlements shared religious practices with neighboring groups, but each had its own customs as well. Archaeological evidence shows early ritual activity on the Palatine Hill, including offerings buried in pits and signs of communal gatherings. These practices suggest an emerging sense of shared identity long before the appearance of Rome as a unified city. The Etruscans played a crucial role in shaping the religious environment that early Rome inherited. Etruscan priests developed detailed methods for interpreting the will of the gods, especially through reading lightning signs and examining the organs of sacrificed animals. These methods, later adopted by the Romans, provided a structured way of understanding divine messages. The Etruscans also introduced new deities, artistic representations of gods, and architectural forms that would influence Roman religious life for centuries. As the Italian peninsula became more interconnected through trade and movement, cultural exchange accelerated. Greek settlers along the southern coasts brought their own gods, myths, and artistic traditions. Around the late 8th and 7th centuries BCE, Greek influence on Italy was already strong. Objects with Greek designs appear in archaeological finds across the peninsula, including areas that would later be part of Rome. Although Greek myths would not fully merge with Roman religion until much later, these early contacts began to introduce new ways of imagining divine beings. Even so, early Italic religions continued to emphasize what scholars call the ritual of doing. The correct action mattered more than belief or story. There was no expectation that a god needed a dramatic narrative or a detailed personality. The important thing was that the spirit, whether a numen, an ancestor, or a natural force, received the proper attention. Because of this mindset, early Roman religion, when it eventually emerged, inherited a focus on precision. Ritual formulas were memorized carefully, and a single mistake could require starting the entire rite again. This concern for accuracy, inherited from centuries of earlier tradition, shaped Roman attitudes toward law, government, and even military organization. It created a culture where order, discipline, and respect for custom were deeply valued. The story of Aeneas stands at the center of Rome's mythic identity. Yet Aeneas was not originally a Roman figure. His tale began in the world of Greek epic poetry, in the traditions surrounding the Trojan War. Over many centuries, storytellers across the Mediterranean told accounts of Trojan heroes who survived the fall of their city. Among these survivors, Aeneas gradually emerged as a figure whose destiny lay far beyond Troy's ruined walls. When the Romans later adopted him into their own tradition, they transformed a wandering hero into the symbolic ancestor of a new people. The earliest references to Aeneas appear in Greek sources from the late Bronze Age traditions, later preserved in works like the Homeric epics. These stories, though shaped by centuries of retelling, describe Aeneas as a prince of Troy, the son of the goddess Aphrodite, and a mortal named Anchises. This divine parentage placed him among the most honored Trojan leaders. In Greek accounts, Aeneas survives the destruction of his city, carrying his father on his shoulders and leading his family to safety. This moment, often depicted in later art, became one of the most important symbols of duty, resilience, and continuity. When Greek settlers began establishing colonies along the coasts of southern Italy during the early 1st millennium BCE, their myths traveled with them. Local Italians encountered these stories through trade, intermarriage, and cultural exchange. Over time, Aeneas became known in parts of Italy not just as a survivor, but as a wanderer whose journey brought him to new lands. Greek writers located some of his travels in Sicily and along the Italian coast, where various communities claimed that he had lingered or left descendants. These traditions existed long before Rome adopted Aeneas as a founding figure. Roman interest in Aeneas grew gradually. By the time Rome began rising as a regional power, several Italian cities already traced their origins to Trojan settlers. Stories of Trojan ancestry offered a prestigious link to the legendary Age of Heroes, and the Romans eventually embraced this symbolic lineage as well. This adoption was not sudden. It took shape over generations as artists, poets, and historians wove Greek tales into early Roman traditions. One reason Aeneas became such an appealing figure to the Romans was the quality the Romans later called pietas. This word described a person's loyalty to family, homeland, and the gods, a loyalty expressed through actions, responsibility, and adherence to duty. Aeneas embodies this idea in Greek stories by rescuing his father, safeguarding his household gods, and seeking a new home for his people. For Romans, who valued discipline, stability, and respect for tradition, Aeneas seemed a natural model of the virtues they celebrated. By the 4th century BCE, as Rome expanded across central Italy, Roman writers began to connect their city's origins to Aeneas in more explicit ways. One early historian, the Roman scholar Fabius Pictor, wrote that Aeneas eventually reached the region of Latium and formed alliances with local peoples. This blending of myth and history provided Romans with a narrative that linked them to both the ancient Mediterranean world and the local Italian landscape. Later traditions described Aeneas meeting a local king named Latinus, ruler of the Latins. According to these accounts, Latinus welcomed the Trojan refugees and offered them land. Aeneas then married Latinus's daughter Lavinia, forging a new alliance that symbolized the merging of Trojan and native Italian traditions. Their union represented a political and cultural fusion that later Romans saw as a model for their own ability to integrate different peoples into their expanding world. Aeneas eventually founded a settlement named Lavinium in honor of Lavinia. This location became a sacred center for early Romans, who believed that their own city's traditions were tied to the rites established there. Ancient sources speak of important religious objects preserved in Lavinium, including the household gods Aeneas carried from Troy. These objects were known as the Penates, and later Romans believed they symbolized the continuity of the Trojan spirit. Aeneas's son, known as Iulus or Ascanius, played a crucial role in linking the Trojan saga to Rome's later mythology. Roman accounts describe Ascanius leaving Lavinium to establish a new city called Alba Longa. This settlement grew into the leading power in the region of Latium and became the center of a long dynasty of kings. Generations later, according to tradition, the twin brothers Romulus and Remus would be born into this royal line. In this way, Aeneas was woven directly into the foundation story of Rome. Although these narratives blend myth and legend, they carry deep meaning for Romans. By claiming Aeneas as an ancestor, the Romans connected themselves to a story of survival, divine favor, and destiny. They also claimed a place within the broader cultural world of the Greeks, whose epic traditions dominated Mediterranean literature. This connection allowed Romans to see themselves as heirs not only to Italian traditions, but also to the heroic age celebrated in Greek poetry. Roman authors in the late Republic further developed the story of Aeneas, using it to explain political and cultural beliefs. The most famous account is the epic poem written by the poet Virgil, who lived during the reign of Augustus. Virgil's Aeneid presents Aeneas as a hero guided by fate to found the line that will eventually lead to Rome. Although the poem was written many centuries after the earliest myths, it reflects the Roman desire to understand their origins in light of their empire's power and responsibilities. In Virgil's account, Aeneas faces storms, battles, and moral dilemmas as he wanders across the Mediterranean. He receives guidance from gods like Venus, his mother, and from Jupiter, whose authority ensures the fulfillment of fate. He also encounters opposition from Juno, queen of the gods, who fears that his descendants will one day rise to greatness. These divine tensions create a narrative that links the struggles of one refugee hero to the destiny of an entire civilization. Although Virgil's version is a literary creation, it captured the Roman imagination because it emphasized themes that resonated deeply with Roman values. Aeneas does not choose his destiny. He accepts it because the gods and the future demand it. This idea that Rome's success was part of a larger, divinely guided plan became a powerful symbol for Roman leaders, especially during the transition from republic to empire. The Roman adoption of Aeneas also had political implications. During the late Republic, several prominent families claimed descent from him. The most influential was the Julian family, which included Julius Caesar. They asserted that their ancestor Ascanius, also known as Iulus, linked their family directly to Venus through Aeneas. This claim reinforced the idea that their political authority had divine origins. Later, Augustus continued this tradition, using the connection to Aeneas to legitimize his rule and present himself as the guardian of Rome's destiny. Beyond politics, the story of Aeneas shaped Roman religious thought. Aeneas's journey was not just a story of personal survival, it was a story about protecting sacred traditions. His careful preservation of the household gods symbolized the Roman belief that continuity of worship was essential to the stability of the community. By carrying Troy's sacred objects to Italy, Aeneas represented the transmission of divine protection from one land to another. The idea that Aeneas brought the Penates to Italy also helped Romans explain why certain religious practices had deep, ancient roots. These connections provided legitimacy to Roman rituals, linking them to the heroic age and reinforcing the idea that Roman religious traditions were not newly invented, but inherited from a noble past. As Rome expanded across Italy and later the Mediterranean, the legend of Aeneas helped unify its diverse populations. People from different regions could see themselves reflected in a story that combined multiple cultures. Aeneas was both foreign and familiar, a refugee from Asia Minor who blended with local Italian traditions. This dual identity mirrored Rome's broader approach to religion and culture, in which new ideas were often welcomed and adapted rather than rejected. The story that leads from Aeneas to the founding of Rome passes through a generations-long line of Latin kings, a chain of events that blends legend, memory, and political tradition. Although these stories are not historical in the modern sense, they reveal how Romans understood their own beginnings. They believed that their city did not arise by accident. Instead, it emerged from a sequence of rulers, sacred obligations, and decisive moments that connected the fall of Troy to the rise of a new power in central Italy. According to Roman tradition, after establishing Lavinium, Aeneas's descendants continued to rule the region. His son Ascanius, also known as Iulus, eventually left Lavinium to found a new settlement called Alba Longa. Located in the Alban Hills, southeast of where Rome would later rise, Alba Longa was believed to be the leading Latin city for many generations. Roman historians described it as the cradle of Latin identity and the political center from which the earliest Roman kings descended. The line of kings at Alba Longa served an important purpose in Roman storytelling. It provided a bridge of ancestry connecting Aeneas's world to the era of the twin founders, Romulus and Remus. Ancient authors listed the names of these Alban kings in long genealogies stretching across centuries. While modern scholars view these lists as symbolic rather than historical, the Romans saw them as proof of continuity. They believed that the values Aeneas carried from Troy, the importance of family, piety, and duty, passed from ruler to ruler until the time came for a new city to emerge. The final Alban king in this tradition was Numitor, a figure whose story set the stage for the birth of Rome. Numitor ruled Alba Longa peacefully until he was overthrown by his younger brother, Amulius. The conflict between Amulius and Numitor reflects a recurring theme in Roman foundation myths: the tension between rightful authority and ambition. Amulius seized the throne through force, and in doing so, he threatened the sacred line that connected Alba Longa to Aeneas. Amulius understood that Numitor's descendants could challenge his rule, so he attempted to prevent any future heirs from being born. Numitor had a daughter named Rhea Silvia. To remove any possibility of her bearing children who might claim the throne, Amulius forced her to become a priestess of the goddess Vesta. Vestal priestesses were required to remain celibate, devoted entirely to maintaining the sacred fire of Vesta and performing rituals that protected the community's hearth. Despite this restriction, Roman tradition says that Rhea Silvia became pregnant with twins. Ancient sources explained this startling event in different ways. Some said that the god Mars visited her, making the twins semi-divine. Others suggested that the story emphasized Rome's belief that its founders were touched by the divine, even if the details had multiple interpretations. Whatever the explanation, the birth of the twins, Romulus and Remus, posed a direct threat to Amulius. When the children were born, Amulius ordered them to be killed. His command reflects the harsh realities behind many ancient foundation stories where political fear and divine destiny collide. Yet, according to Roman legend, the servants charged with killing the infants could not bring themselves to do it. Instead, they placed the twins in a basket and set it afloat on the Tiber River, hoping that fate might intervene. The river, swollen from seasonal flooding, carried the basket downstream until it came to rest near the base of the Palatine Hill. This detail is significant. The Palatine Hill would later become one of the central landmarks of Rome, home to important temples and eventually the palaces of emperors. By situating the story here, Romans linked their earliest memories to the physical location of their future city. According to legend, a she-wolf discovered the abandoned infants and nursed them. This striking image became one of the most famous symbols of Rome. Ancient writers debated whether the tale referred to an actual wolf or whether the word might have symbolized a human caretaker known by a similar term. But whatever the original meaning, the story of the she-wolf captured the Roman imagination. It came to represent resilience, survival, and the idea that Rome's founders were nurtured by nature itself before rising to greatness. A shepherd named Faustulus later found the twins and brought them home. Raised among shepherds in the countryside, Romulus and Remus grew into strong young men known for courage and leadership. Their upbringing in a rural setting reflected Rome's early identity as a community closely connected to the land. Later, Romans often portrayed their ancestors as tough, practical people shaped by humble origins. As the twins matured, their natural leadership attracted followers. Roman tradition says that they became champions of local shepherds and farmers, defending their communities against bandits. During one of these conflicts, Remus was captured and brought before Numitor, the very grandfather the twins had never known. Numitor recognized unusual traits in the young man and began to uncover the truth. When Romulus came to rescue his brother, the full story emerged. The twins learned their true identity, and Numitor realized that the descendants of his line had survived. With this revelation, Romulus and Remus took action. They overthrew Amulius, restoring their grandfather, Numitor, to the throne of Alba Longa. This moment, in Roman storytelling, symbolized the restoration of justice and the re-establishment of rightful rule. But the story did not end with the return of Numitor. The twins, no longer tied to Alba Longa, sought to establish a city of their own. The decision to found a new city reflects a central theme in Roman identity, the belief that Rome was not merely inherited from the past, but created with a particular purpose. According to tradition, the twins chose an area near where they had been rescued as infants, the region around the Palatine and Aventine hills. However, disagreements soon arose between them. Each twin favored a different hill, and they sought guidance from the gods through augury, the practice of interpreting the will of divine forces by observing the behavior of birds. Romulus and Remus each performed the ritual, but their results conflicted. Remus saw a greater number of birds, while Romulus claimed he had seen them first. This disagreement escalated into a dispute over divine favor. The use of augury in this story highlights a key aspect of Roman religion. Major decisions required signs from the gods, and conflicting interpretations could lead to conflict among humans. The tension between the brothers eventually turned violent. According to the most widespread version of the legend, Remus mocked the boundary Romulus had begun to mark for his new city. When he leapt across the boundary line, an act seen as a serious violation, Romulus struck him down. The death of Remus is one of the most somber moments in Roman mythology. It symbolized the difficult choices and severe consequences that often accompanied the founding of ancient cities. Later Romans interpreted this episode as a reminder that order and stability sometimes came at great cost. After Remus's death, Romulus continued the work of building his new city. He marked out the sacred boundary known as the pomerium, a ritual act that defined the city's spiritual limits. This act reflected deep-rooted traditions inherited from earlier Italic practices, where boundaries held religious significance. Crossing them improperly could endanger community harmony and invite divine displeasure. Romulus's careful attention to this ritual underscored the idea that the city's foundations rested on sacred principles as much as on physical construction. Romulus then established institutions to support the new community. He organized groups of men into early political and military bodies and created a system of social hierarchy that reflected both family lineage and civic responsibility. While these structures would evolve dramatically over time, the Romans believed that their earliest institutions were rooted in the actions of Romulus. The new city, according to tradition, was named Rome in his honor. Roman storytellers emphasized that from the very beginning, the city carried the mark of human effort shaped by divine guidance. Romulus, both a founder and a figure touched by divinity through his connection to Mars, became the symbolic first king of Rome. Later tradition held that he eventually disappeared in a storm and was taken up among the gods, becoming the divine figure known as Quirinus. This transformation mirrored the Roman belief that exceptional leaders could be elevated after death, a concept that would play an important role in later Roman politics. After the legendary founding of Rome under Romulus, the early Roman community entered a new phase in its development, a period shaped not by mythic birth or heroic struggle, but by the careful organization of ritual, law, and sacred tradition. The Romans believed that the foundation of their city required more than strength and political structure. It also demanded a system of religious institutions that would guide public life, shape civic identity, and ensure harmony between the community and the divine world. This responsibility, according to Roman tradition, fell to the early kings who succeeded Romulus, especially the second king, Numa Pompilius. The early monarchy, as remembered by the Romans, consisted of a line of rulers who each contributed something essential to the young city. While Romulus was credited with establishing civic structures and forming the first political groups, Numa was remembered as the architect of Rome's religious order. Whether or not these kings existed exactly as later historians described them, their stories reveal what Romans believed about the origins of their institutions. In their view, the stability and strength of Rome came not only from political leadership, but also from a deep respect for ritual and divine law. Numa Pompilius, who followed Romulus, was traditionally described as a Sabine, a member of one of the neighboring Italic peoples who had joined with the Romans through early alliances. This connection to the Sabines gave Numa a background associated with strict customs, moral discipline, and reverence for the gods. Roman writers often contrasted Numa's peaceful, thoughtful character with the martial energy of Romulus. Where Romulus represented action, expansion, and the founding moment, Numa represented order, reflection, and the careful structuring of communal life. According to tradition, Numa ruled for many years, dedicating his time to shaping the religious foundations of the city. He was said to have reorganized the Roman calendar, assigning specific religious festivals to particular days, and structuring the year around cycles of ritual observance. This effort turned time itself into a sacred framework. By giving each festival a place in the calendar, Numa helped Romans connect their daily lives to recurring acts of worship, reinforcing the idea that public life and sacred duty were inseparable. One of Numa's most important contributions was the creation of priestly offices. The Romans believed that the gods expressed their will through signs that required expert interpretation. To manage this responsibility, Numa established key priesthoods that continued to function throughout Roman history. Among these were the flamens, priests dedicated to specific major gods. Each flamen maintained rituals, offerings, and customs tied to the god they served. The most prominent among them included the flamen of Jupiter, the flamen of Mars, and the flamen of Quirinus. These roles ensured that the worship of Rome's principal deities was conducted with precision and consistency. Numa also formalized the role of the augurs, religious officials responsible for interpreting signs from the gods, especially those observed in the behavior of birds. Augury had deep roots in Italic tradition, and by institutionalizing it within the city, Numa ensured that major public decisions, such as the appointment of officials or the launching of military campaigns, would require divine approval. This practice reflected the Roman belief that proper coordination with the divine realm was essential for civic harmony and success. Another major institution attributed to Numa was the College of Pontiffs, a group of priests responsible for overseeing the entire religious system. The pontiffs maintained sacred records, supervised rituals, preserved knowledge of proper ceremony, and ensured that both private and public acts of worship conformed to established rules. The leader of this group, the Pontifex Maximus, became one of the most influential religious figures in Roman society. Centuries later, even powerful emperors would assume this title, demonstrating how important Numa's contributions remained. Perhaps the most famous religious institution linked to Numa was the Order of the Vestal Virgins. These priestesses served the goddess Vesta, guardian of the hearth and the flame that symbolized the life of the Roman community. The Vestals maintained the sacred fire within the temple of Vesta, ensuring it never went out. Their service involved strict discipline, long years of commitment, and significant honor. Romans believed that the purity and devotion of the Vestal Virgins protected the city, and their role became one of the most respected and enduring in Roman religion. Numa's reforms extended beyond the creation of priesthoods. He established sacred rites that regulated interactions between humans and the divine. One important aspect of this effort was the clarification of what later Romans called ius divinum, the divine law governing proper ritual practice. This body of traditions and rules dictated how sacrifices should be offered, how oaths should be sworn, and how individuals and officials must honor the gods. By formalizing these customs, Numa helped ensure that Roman religion would be consistent, orderly, and deeply embedded in public life. Unlike Romulus, who was associated with warfare and expansion, Numa was remembered as a peaceful ruler who discouraged unnecessary conflict. Roman tradition emphasized that during Numa's reign, the city remained at peace, focusing on internal organization rather than external conquest. This portrayal reflected the Roman ideal that religion served as a stabilizing force. By creating a structured system of worship, Numa helped unify the still developing community and fostered shared identity. The peaceful image of Numa does not necessarily reflect historical fact, but it does reveal what Romans valued in their early kings. They believed that the foundation of their religious institutions required not only ritual knowledge but also a ruler devoted to harmony and balance. Ancient sources often described Numa as a wise and contemplative figure who sought guidance from the gods in all matters. One tradition claimed that he received advice from a divine nymph named Egeria, who lived in a sacred grove near the city. While this detail belongs to the realm of myth, it highlights the belief that Rome's earliest religious structures were established with divine insight. The importance of Numa's contributions can also be seen in how the Romans later viewed their religious duties. They believed that proper ritual practice was essential to maintaining the city's security and prosperity. Errors in ceremony, neglect of sacred obligations, or disrespect for divine law were thought to bring misfortune. Roman historians frequently explained military defeats, natural disasters, or political unrest as signs that the gods were displeased. The idea that religious practice must be precise, an idea rooted in earlier Italic traditions, became even more central after Numa organized the system. After Numa, the early monarchy continued to evolve. Later, kings were credited with additional reforms and expansions of religious life. Among these rulers were figures like Tullus Hostilius and Ancus Marcius, each associated with different aspects of Roman development. Tullus Hostilius, for example, was remembered as more warlike than Numa and was associated with the expansion of Roman territory. During his rule, according to tradition, certain rites connected to the gods of war gained greater prominence. Ancus Marcius, another early king, was said to have established public works and strengthened rituals associated with trade and diplomacy. Each of these figures contributed something distinct to the shaping of Rome's identity. These stories about the early kings carried symbolic meaning. They allowed Romans to explain how their city acquired its religious institutions and why these institutions remained so important. In Roman thought, the actions of these kings were not simply historical events. They were foundational acts that shaped the relationship between the community and the divine realm. The monarchy, in this sense, served as a bridge between human authority and sacred tradition. As Rome transitioned from monarchy to republic in later centuries, many of the religious structures attributed to Numa and the early kings remained central. The priesthoods continued, the calendar guided public life, augury shaped political decisions, and the pontiffs preserved sacred knowledge. These institutions helped give the republic its distinctive character, blending civic structure with religious duty. Because of this continuity, the early kings held an honored place in Roman cultural memory. Their stories were told and retold as reminders of the city's deep roots in both human effort and divine guidance. Understanding the role of these early kings helps illuminate how Roman religion became such an integral part of political life. Religion in Rome was not a separate sphere. It was woven into the workings of the state. Leaders needed divine approval, rituals marked civic events, and festivals structured the rhythm of the year. These practices reflected the foundational work attributed to Numa and his successors. As Rome grew from a collection of small settlements into a functioning city, its religious landscape expanded as well. The early rituals and priesthoods attributed to Numa Pompilius gave Rome structure, but the divine world those institutions served needed definition. The Romans did not begin with a fully formed pantheon resembling the familiar lineup of classical gods. Instead, their earliest deities reflected the practical needs, agricultural rhythms, and social structures of a developing community. Over time, these deities gained clearer identities, and contact with neighboring peoples enriched and transformed their roles. In the earliest phase of Roman religion, the gods were not depicted in human form. They were powers, forces, or presences associated with specific functions. But as the city matured, three major deities rose to central importance: Jupiter, Mars, and Quirinus. These gods became known as the early Roman triad, a grouping that reflected the values and concerns of Rome's first generations. Their worship provides insight into the priorities of a society still rooted in agriculture, kinship, and community protection. Jupiter, whose early presence developed from the ancient Italic belief in the sacred power of the sky, became the highest of the Roman gods. His authority was linked to the heavens, storms and lightning, forces that seemed to express cosmic judgment. The Romans believed that Jupiter oversaw treaties, maintained justice, and protected the community. As Rome began to build political structures, Jupiter's role expanded. He became the guarantor of oaths sworn in his name, the witness to agreements between peoples, and the protector of the city's moral order. One of the most important early sites dedicated to Jupiter was located on the Capitoline Hill, one of the city's central high points. Long before monumental temples stood there, the hill was already a sacred place. Archaeological evidence shows signs of ritual activity dating back centuries. The hill offered a vantage point, commanding views of the surrounding region, and became a symbolic center of divine authority. Later, the grand temple to Jupiter Optimus Maximus would rise on this hill. But the origins of Jupiter's connection to the Capitoline ran much deeper. The early worship of Jupiter demonstrated the Roman belief that divine oversight was essential to maintaining both natural and social order. Mars, another key member of the early triad, carried a different but equally important role. Before becoming known primarily as a god of war, Mars was closely associated with agriculture and the protection of fields. Early Romans viewed Mars as a guardian who ensured the fertility of crops and the safety of livestock. As the Roman community grew and began to face conflicts with neighboring groups, Mars's role expanded. He came to represent not only agricultural protection, but also military readiness. The dual nature of Mars, both nurturer and warrior, reflected the needs of a society that farmed its own land, yet had to defend it through force when necessary. Mars's worship involved rituals that marked the changing seasons and prepared the community for the agricultural and military demands of the year. The priests dedicated to Mars, known as the Salii, performed ceremonial dances and carried sacred shields through the city in a series of festivals marking the cycle of the seasons. These ceremonies expressed the inseparable link between farming, warfare, and religious duty. Rome's survival depended on both the productivity of its land and the strength of its defenders, and Mars embodied that balance. The third member of the early triad, Quirinus, is perhaps the most mysterious to modern readers. While Jupiter represented divine authority and Mars symbolized protection, Quirinus was associated with the citizen body itself. His name may be connected to an early Roman term for spear-bearing men, or to the Sabine word for a community of organized citizens. In either case, Quirinus embodied the collective identity of the Roman people. He represented civic unity, social cooperation, and the daily life of Rome's households and families. The inclusion of Quirinus in the early triad suggests that Rome's earliest religious system placed equal value on community cohesion as on divine oversight and protection. Quirinus was linked to peace, harvests, and the well-being of the citizenry. His worship emphasized domestic stability and social order. Later tradition associated Quirinus with the deified Romulus, reflecting the belief that Rome's founder became a guardian of the people he had created. Whether or not this connection was part of the earliest beliefs, it underscores the importance of Quirinus in shaping Roman identity. The early Roman triad did not exist in isolation. Rome's position in central Italy exposed it to influences from neighboring peoples, most notably the Etruscans and the Sabines. These groups contributed not only cultural practices but also religious concepts that reshaped the Roman pantheon. The Etruscans in particular played a major role in transforming Roman religious life as the city grew. Etruscan religion was rich in ritual precision, divination, and artistic representation. Unlike the Romans of the earliest period, the Etruscans carved images of their gods and built impressive temples. As Rome came under the influence of Etruscan kings during the later period of the monarchy, these cultural practices spread throughout the city. The Etruscans introduced architectural styles that shaped Rome's temple construction, including the use of large terracotta sculptures and elevated platforms. The Etruscans also practiced a detailed system of interpreting divine will, known as haruspicy. This method involved examining the organs of sacrificed animals, especially the liver, for signs of divine approval or warning. Etruscan priests believed that the gods communicated through these signs, and their interpretations guided important decisions. Rome adopted this system alongside its own practices of augury, blending techniques from different traditions into a unique religious structure. The Etruscan influence extended to the city's major deities. Jupiter, who already held a position of importance, took on characteristics associated with the Etruscan sky god, often represented with thunderbolt imagery. Juno, who would later join Jupiter and Minerva in the Capitoline triad, gained prominence through Etruscan influence as well. Minerva, originally associated with crafts and practical knowledge, also became a central figure in Roman religion, partly because of Etruscan connections. The grouping of Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva eventually replaced the earlier triad of Jupiter, Mars, and Quirinus as the principal state deities, marking an important shift in Rome's religious evolution. Alongside Etruscan influence, the Sabines contributed traditions that shaped early Roman religious life. The Sabine people, whose interactions with Rome included both conflict and alliance, held beliefs that merged with Roman customs over time. Some Roman stories even claimed that certain deities, such as Quirinus, had Sabine origins. This blending of traditions reflected the fluidity of early Roman religion, which absorbed elements from various sources without losing its core emphasis on ritual practice and community identity. In addition to the major gods, Rome's religious world included countless lesser deities and spirits associated with specific actions, places, or occupations. These deities served important functions in daily life. For example, Janus, the god of beginnings, transitions, and doorways, held a central position in Roman ritual. His temple in the Forum, whose doors were traditionally open in times of war and closed in times of peace, symbolized the boundary between states of conflict and harmony. Janus was unique in that he presided over transitional moments rather than a specific domain of nature. Another important figure was Vesta, guardian of the hearth. Her presence symbolized the life of the community. While she was later associated with the Vestal Virgins, Vesta's importance as a domestic and civic protector extended beyond any single institution. She embodied the belief that the continuity of Rome depended on the stability of its central flame, a symbol inherited from early Italic traditions. These deities formed the foundation upon which later Roman religion was built. They represented the early Roman understanding of the divine, not as a group of dramatic, storytelling gods, but as forces intertwined with community life. The functions of these gods reflected the needs of a society concerned with agriculture, warfare, domestic order, and social unity. Over time, as Rome expanded its territory and encountered new cultures, these early deities would gain additional stories, attributes, and artistic representations. But their origins grounded Roman religion in a practical approach to divine relations. The development of the early pantheon also supported the growth of Rome's political structures. Religious offices tied to specific gods reinforced the authority of the ruling class, who often held priesthoods as part of their public responsibilities. Rituals connected to Mars prepared the community for defense, while rites honoring Jupiter emphasized the divine approval of treaties and civic decisions. The worship of Quirinus reinforced the unity of citizens, strengthening their sense of collective identity. As Rome expanded and interacted with the wider Mediterranean world, its religious landscape underwent a profound transformation. The early Roman pantheon, rooted in functional deities and ritual-centered worship, began to merge with the rich narrative traditions of the Greeks. This blending did not happen all at once, nor did it erase Rome's earlier religious practices. Instead, it layered new meanings onto old foundations, creating a complex system in which Roman gods carried both Italic origins and Greek personalities. Understanding this merging is essential for grasping how Roman mythology evolved from a network of practical rituals into a fully developed mythological system. The earliest contacts between Rome and Greek culture occurred through trade and colonization in southern Italy. From the late 2nd millennium BCE onward, Greek merchants and settlers established communities along the coastline, a region later known to the Romans as Magna Graecia. These Greek cities, such as Cumae, Tarentum, and Sybaris, became centers of commerce, art, and storytelling. Their myths, religious symbols, and artistic styles spread inland over many generations, carried by traders, artisans, and travelers. Initially, the influence of Greek mythology on Rome was indirect. Greek pottery, figurines, and inscriptions found their way into Italic settlements. These objects depicted gods and heroes like Athena, Apollo, and Heracles. While early Romans may not have fully understood the stories behind these figures, the images introduced new ways of imagining divine beings. Over time, Roman communities became more familiar with Greek deities, and parallels began to emerge between Greek gods and the functional Roman noumena already present in Rome's religious system. One of the earliest Greek deities to gain a foothold in Roman worship was Apollo. Unlike many other gods, Apollo entered Roman religion largely in his Greek form. His association with healing, prophecy, and music appealed to Romans, especially during periods of crisis. Records from the early Republic describe occasions when the Romans consulted the oracle at Cumae, seeking guidance from the Sibyl, a prophetess associated with Apollo. This connection introduced Apollo to Roman religious life long before other Greek gods became widely integrated. As Roman power expanded across the Italian peninsula during the early Republic, Greek influence increased dramatically. Roman military campaigns brought them into direct contact with Greek city-states and Greek-speaking peoples. With these encounters came a deeper appreciation of Greek culture, its literature, art, and religious traditions. For many Romans, Greek culture represented sophistication and intellectual refinement. Educated Romans studied Greek philosophy, read Greek poetry, and adopted Greek artistic styles. This cultural admiration naturally extended to the Greek gods and their stories. The process of identifying Roman gods with Greek counterparts, known as interpretatio Graeca, was not simply an act of copying. Instead, it was a process of comparison and blending. Romans recognized similarities between their own functional deities and the more fully developed personalities of the Greek gods. Jupiter, long understood as a sky and storm deity, became associated with Zeus. Mars, originally a guardian of fields and protector of warriors, merged with the Greek Ares, though the Romans continued to see Mars as more honorable and central to civic life than the often destructive Ares. Minerva, linked to crafts and practical knowledge, became associated with Athena. Even deities like Venus, who had earlier Italic connections to fertility and gardens, came to be identified with Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love and beauty. This identification process gradually reshaped Roman religious thought. The gods now had stories, narratives involving family ties, rivalries, romances, and dramatic events. These stories enriched the Roman understanding of the divine world, adding emotional depth and symbolic meaning to what had previously been functional roles. At the same time, the Romans remained deeply committed to ritual precision. Their adoption of Greek myths did not replace their ritual practices, it supplemented them. The Greeks provided the narratives, but the Romans retained their emphasis on proper ceremony and moral duty. One striking example of this blending can be seen in the evolution of Jupiter's image. Under Greek influence, Jupiter not only remained a sky god, but also took on the role of king of the gods, similar to Zeus. Artistic representations began to show him seated on a throne, holding a thunderbolt. These images appeared on coins, in temples, and on public monuments. Yet, Jupiter retained uniquely Roman qualities. He was still the guardian of oaths, the overseer of treaties, and the deity invoked during important state ceremonies. The merging of forms did not erase local identity, it strengthened it. Venus provides another revealing example. When identified with Aphrodite, Venus gained new associations with beauty, passion, and mythic storytelling. These narratives, especially those involving the Trojan War, resonated strongly with Roman identity. The legend that Aeneas was the son of Venus deepened the connection between Roman ancestry and the Greek mythological world. This link became politically significant during the late Republic, when prominent Roman families, most notably the Julian line, claimed descent from Venus through Aeneas and his son Iulus. Greek mythology therefore became a tool not only for religion, but also for political identity and prestige. Greek influence also transformed religious architecture in Rome. Early Italic worship often took place in open-air spaces, sacred groves, or small shrines. Greek temples, by contrast, featured symmetrical design, columns, decorated pediments, and representations of divine figures. As Roman builders adopted Greek styles, the city's religious landscape changed. Temples dedicated to Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, and other gods began to reflect Greek architectural techniques. Sculptors created statues that depicted the gods in human form, following Greek artistic conventions. This architectural shift had a broader cultural impact. The presence of statues and elaborate temple designs helped Romans conceptualize their gods in more personal terms. Greek mythology offered recognizable images that became part of the Roman visual vocabulary. Visitors to temples could now see the gods in carved stone or painted fresco, giving shape to what had once been invisible forces. The influence of Greek religion extended beyond architecture to the realm of public festivals and sacred texts. The Romans adopted the practice of consulting the Sibylline books, a collection of prophetic writings said to have originated in Greek tradition. These texts were kept in Rome and consulted during times of crisis. They offered guidance on what rituals or actions were required to appease the gods. Although the Romans incorporated these writings into their religious system, they interpreted them in ways that fit Roman priorities. Greek theatrical traditions also influenced Roman festivals. Over time, religious celebrations in Rome began to incorporate dramatic performances, music, and poetry inspired by Greek forms. Playwrights such as Livius Andronicus and later Plautus and Terence adapted Greek plays for Roman audiences, and many of these works depicted interactions among the gods. These performances introduced Romans to Greek mythological narratives, spreading them across all levels of society, not only among the educated elite. As Greek mythology became more familiar, Roman authors began writing their own interpretations. Poets such as Ennius and later Ovid retold Greek myths in Latin, blending Greek characters with Roman themes. This literary activity helped integrate mythology into Roman education. Students read Greek myths as part of their training in rhetoric and literature, learning to connect these stories to philosophical ideas and moral lessons. Myth became a shared cultural language, enriching public life and artistic expression. Despite this strong Greek influence, the Romans maintained a distinct approach to worship. For them, myth was not the core of religious practice. Ritual remained central. Even as the gods acquired Greek stories, the duties of priests, the significance of sacrifices, and the importance of proper ceremonies remained firmly rooted in Roman tradition. A Roman might enjoy hearing stories about Jupiter and Juno's quarrels on Mount Olympus, but when performing a sacrifice or taking a public oath, that same individual adhered to precise Roman formulas. This dual system, Greek mythology combined with Roman ritual, created a unique religious structure. Greek influence brought narrative, emotion, and symbolism. Roman tradition maintained order, duty, and communal stability. The merging of these two systems produced a pantheon that was both familiar to the wider Mediterranean world and distinctly Roman in character. The adoption of Greek deities also facilitated Rome's expansion. As the city extended its influence across Italy and beyond, it encountered diverse cultures with their own gods and traditions. The Roman ability to assimilate Greek mythology made it easier to recognize local deities and identify them with known divine figures. This practice helped integrate conquered peoples into the Roman world, allowing them to maintain their own traditions while participating in a broader religious system. With the rise of the Roman Republic, the the city entered a new phase of political and religious development. The monarchy's end did not weaken the importance of divine authority in public life. Instead, the Republic placed religion directly in the hands of elected officials and priestly colleges, making sacred practice essential to governance. As Rome expanded its influence across Italy and later far beyond, religion served as a framework for decision-making, diplomacy, warfare, and state identity. The stories of the gods merged with the demands of a growing power, and rituals became tools that shaped the direction of the Republic itself. The shift from monarchy to republic meant that no single ruler could claim exclusive religious authority. Instead, multiple magistrates shared responsibility for maintaining Rome's relationship with the divine realm. This balance reflected the broader political structure of the Republic, which valued collective decision-making and checks on individual power. In this environment, religion became more deeply woven into public institutions than ever before. One of the most important religious bodies in the Republic was the College of Pontiffs. As guardians of Rome's sacred law, the pontiffs oversaw rituals, maintained calendars, recorded prodigies, and advised magistrates. The head of this college, the Pontifex Maximus, held immense authority. Although this role had existed since the age of kings, it gained new prominence under the Republic. The Pontifex Maximus ensured continuity between past and present, preserving traditional forms while adapting practices to the needs of a growing state. Alongside the pontiffs stood the augurs, whose role was to interpret signs from the gods. Augury became essential for political legitimacy. Before any major decision, whether electing officials, passing legislation, or declaring war, magistrates sought the approval of the gods by observing the behavior of birds or interpreting other natural signs. If the augurs announced unfavorable omens, the action could not proceed. In this way, religion served as a legal mechanism, shaping civic order and preventing rash or divisive acts. The use of augury also reinforced the Republic's connection to its ancient traditions. Romans believed that the gods sent messages through the natural world, and their leaders had a duty to interpret those signs accurately. Failure to follow proper procedures risked offending the gods and endangering the city. This belief gave Roman politics a sense of moral weight. Even ambitious leaders had to respect ritual constraints, at least publicly, to maintain legitimacy. Another crucial aspect of Republican religion was the reading of prodigies. When unusual events occurred, such as earthquakes, lightning strikes in odd locations, or strange births, they were interpreted as signs of divine displeasure or warning. The Senate, acting as Rome's deliberative body, consulted the pontiffs or, in more serious cases, the Sibylline books. These prophetic writings, originally connected to Greek traditions, were kept under strict control. During moments of crisis, the Senate ordered the custodians to consult the texts for guidance on what rituals or offerings were needed to restore harmony. The reliance on prodigy reports reflected a broader Roman belief. The gods communicated through the world, and these messages required specific, carefully prescribed responses. Ritual mistakes, neglected festivals, or moral failings could provoke divine anger. Public rituals were therefore not optional, they were a necessary part of statecraft. As Rome expanded, religion played a vital role in military affairs. Generals made vows to the gods before campaigns, promising temples, offerings, or festivals in exchange for victory. These vows, known as vota, allowed military success to be framed as a partnership between the commander and the divine powers. After a successful campaign, the general fulfilled the vow by funding construction projects or sponsoring public celebrations. This practice linked religious duty to civic improvement, as temples sponsored by victorious commanders often became major landmarks. The triumph, Rome's most prestigious military ceremony, expressed this relationship between human achievement and divine favor. During a triumph, the victorious general paraded through the city, displaying spoils, prisoners, and symbols of conquest. The procession ended at the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, where the general offered thanks to the god. This ritual reinforced the idea that victory came not solely from human skill, but from the guidance and support of the gods. The triumph also tied political authority to religious legitimacy, as only certain victories merited this honor, and the Senate determined who qualified. Temple building became a defining feature of Republican religion. As Rome fought wars across Italy and beyond, new deities entered the city through a process known as evocatio. In this ritual, Roman leaders offered foreign gods a place in Rome if they would abandon their own people and favor the Roman side. Whether or not this reflected actual religious belief among conquered peoples, it served a symbolic purpose. Rome presented itself as a city capable of welcoming and honoring gods from across the known world. Many of these foreign gods received temples within the city. For example, during conflicts with the Samnites and later with Carthage, Rome adopted new deities associated with protection, victory, and fate. This openness to new divine powers demonstrated Rome's adaptability. Instead of rejecting foreign gods, the Romans sought to incorporate them, strengthening their own religious system in the process. Among the temples built during the Republic were those dedicated to Saturn, whose festival, the Saturnalia, became one of the most popular celebrations, to Castor and Pollux, twin gods associated with military victory, and to Fortuna, the goddess of luck and fate. Each temple served not only as a religious center, but also as a political and social landmark. Some temples housed Senate meetings, while others functioned as public treasury buildings or gathering places. In this way, religious architecture became part of the city's civic infrastructure. The expansion of Republican religion also involved the development of sacred festivals. These festivals marked the rhythms of the year and celebrated the gods who protected the community. The Lupercalia, connected to fertility and purification, involved priests running through the streets to bless households. The Floralia celebrated flowers and the arrival of spring. The triumphal festival honoring Jupiter commemorated military success. These events helped maintain a shared cultural identity among Rome's growing population. They brought together citizens of different backgrounds, reinforcing a sense of unity rooted in shared ritual. The integration of religion into public life also shaped Rome's diplomacy. Treaties with other peoples were sworn before the gods, often involving rituals that symbolized the seriousness of the agreement. Breaking a treaty was not only a political act, but also a religious offense. Romans believed that the gods punished treachery, and this belief gave international agreements a moral dimension. As the Republic expanded across the Mediterranean, Roman leaders encountered new cultures and religious systems. The interactions with Greek colonies deepened the merging of Roman and Greek religious practices. Likewise, contact with Etruscan cities, Celtic tribes, and Eastern kingdoms introduced new gods, symbols, and traditions. Rome's flexible approach allowed it to absorb these elements while maintaining a recognizable core. Despite this openness, Roman religion during the Republic remained strongly tied to ideas of civic duty and public morality. Religious office was considered an honor and responsibility. Holding a priesthood demonstrated commitment to the community and often enhanced political influence. Prestigious families sought positions among the pontiffs, augurs, and other priestly colleges, viewing these roles as part of a complete public career. The blending of religion and politics was visible not only at the level of elites, but also in everyday life. Ordinary Romans engaged in domestic rituals, made offerings at household shrines, and participated in community festivals. Although household religion played an important role, the public religious system shaped much of the cultural environment. Statues of gods stood in marketplaces, temples dominated the skyline, and public rituals accompanied major political events. As Rome expanded beyond Italy, the Republic's religious system faced new pressures. Governing a vast territory brought challenges that required adaptation. The influx of wealth and cultural diversity introduced new ideas about the gods. Some Romans embraced these influences enthusiastically, while others feared that foreign customs might weaken traditional values. This tension set the stage for later conflicts over religious identity, especially as new cults from the Eastern Mediterranean began attracting followers. Despite these pressures, the Republican religious system remained remarkably stable. Its success lay in its flexibility. Roman religion could absorb new gods without discarding old ones, adopt foreign practices without losing its sense of tradition, and integrate divine authority into political structures without undermining civic order. These qualities made Roman religion a powerful unifying force at a time when the Republic faced constant change. While the Republic elevated religion into a central tool of statecraft, an equally important realm of worship lived far from the Senate House and the grand festivals. It thrived inside kitchens, courtyards, workshops, and neighborhood crossroads. This was the world of everyday Roman religion, a network of intimate rituals, household deities, and local traditions that shaped the rhythms of ordinary life. It was a form of worship that existed long before Rome's political rise and remained vital even as the Republic grew into a Mediterranean power. For most Romans, sacred experience was not confined to temples or official ceremonies. The divine world entered daily routines through gestures that marked meals, family gatherings, and seasonal transitions. These acts reflected beliefs inherited from earlier Italic culture, adapted over time to the needs of a diverse and expanding population. The focus was not on storytelling or mythic drama, but on maintaining harmony between the living and the unseen forces believed to guard the home and community. At the center of household religion were the Lares and the Penates, two groups of deities whose roles differed but often overlapped. The Lares were guardians of places, protectors of the boundaries and physical spaces where people lived. Each home had its own Lar, believed to watch over the family's property, land, and well-being. The Penates, by contrast, were protectors of the household's food stores, especially the pantry and hearth. They ensured abundance and safety, guiding the family through the daily cycles of preparation and nourishment. Most Roman houses, whether simple apartments or large villas, included a small shrine known as the Lararium. This shrine was typically located in a central area of the home, sometimes near the kitchen, other times in the courtyard or dining space. Painted images or small clay statues of the Lares and Penates stood there, accompanied by offerings such as wine, fruit, or incense. Family members visited the shrine daily, offering thanks or asking for protection. These rituals did not require a priest or public ceremony. They were performed quietly by the head of the household, known as the paterfamilias, or by other family members. The prominence of household gods reflected the Roman belief that divine protection began at home. A stable household, in turn, formed the foundation of a stable community. This concept shaped Roman social values: obedience to elders, respect for tradition, and the need to safeguard family honor. Even freedmen, slaves, and immigrants participated in household rituals, giving them a place within the spiritual fabric of Roman society. In addition to the Lares and Penates, households honored another divine presence known as the genius. The genius represented the protective spirit of an individual, a family, or even a place. Each man was believed to have a personal genius, a spiritual companion who guided him through life. Women honored a similar protective spirit known as the Juno. These concepts reinforced the idea that every individual had a sacred dimension, a link to the divine that shaped personal character and fortune. The genius of the paterfamilias held special importance. Family members honored his genius on birthdays, anniversaries, and significant family events. This practice did not express worship of the man himself, but of the spiritual force that protected and sustained the household. Over time, the concept of the genius expanded beyond the home. Entire neighborhoods celebrated the genius of the place where they lived, and eventually the Roman state honored the genius of the Roman people collectively. In the imperial period, the emperor's genius became a central figure in public ceremonies, an idea rooted in these early household traditions. Beyond the home, Roman religion thrived in local neighborhoods. Every district had its own sacred spaces, often marked by small shrines at crossroads. These shrines, known as compita, were dedicated to the Lares of the crossroads, the guardians who protected the flow of movement and community interaction. Festivals known as the comparative brought neighbors together to honor these deities with processions, offerings, and shared meals. In larger cities, including Rome itself, these local cults helped maintain a sense of identity among diverse groups living in crowded quarters. Local religion also structured daily routines in more subtle ways. For example, Romans marked the beginning of the day with offerings at the household shrine and often spoke short prayers before meals. Travelers made small offerings before leaving on journeys, and merchants dedicated portions of their earnings to protective spirits associated with their trade. Farmers prayed to specific deities who watched over particular tasks, such as sowing, plowing, or harvesting. Craftsmen honored gods connected to their professions, maintaining shrines in workshops or guild buildings. Roman religion also shaped major life events. Birth, coming of age, marriage, and death, each involved rituals meant to protect the individual and connect the family to the divine. When a child was born, offerings were made to protect the infant, who was considered vulnerable to harmful forces. When a boy reached maturity, he dedicated his childhood amulet to the household gods. Marriage ceremonies included rituals to Juno, who presided over the bond between husband and wife. In death, elaborate rites ensured that the deceased joined the ancestral spirits and did not linger as a restless presence. The importance of ancestor worship cannot be overstated. Romans believed that the spirits of deceased family members, known as the manes or de parentes, continued to influence the household. Families honored them during festivals such as the parentalia, a multi-day observance during which people visited graves, offered food, and decorated burial sites. Forgetting the ancestors was seen as a grave failure of duty. Remembering them helped sustain the continuity of the family line, linking the living and the dead in a shared spiritual community. Women played a crucial role in household religion. While they did not typically hold major public priesthoods, they oversaw many domestic rituals. They tended the hearth, which symbolized the unity and survival of the home. The flame at the household hearth echoed the sacred fire tended by the Vestal Virgins in the public temple of Vesta. In this way, the smallest unit of Roman society mirrored the city itself, with each family acting as a miniature version of the civic community. Domestic slavery also intersected with household religion. Enslaved individuals participated in rituals, tended shrines, and even had personal devotions to deities associated with their homelands. In some cases, masters allowed enslaved people to keep their own sacred objects, creating a diverse spiritual landscape within a single household. Far from being uniform, Roman domestic religion reflected the multicultural nature of the republic's growing population. The growth of Rome's urban centers introduced new layers to everyday worship. Markets, workshops, and guild halls featured shrines dedicated to deities associated with commerce, craftsmanship, and trade. Mercury, god of merchants and communication, was a popular figure in these contexts. So were Minerva, protector of artisans, Ceres, guardian of agriculture and food supply, and Fortuna, who influenced chance and prosperity. These deities appeared in local festivals, guild ceremonies, and street-side shrines visited by workers seeking success in their trades. In rural areas, religious life reflected the agricultural cycle. Farmers honored deities who governed planting, fertilizing, and harvest. While some of these gods later took on Greek identities, many preserved their old Italic functions. For example, Tellus represented the earth, while Liber and Libra oversaw fertility. These deities were invoked during specific agricultural tasks, using formulas and offerings rooted in ancient tradition. Rural rituals reinforced the close connection between farming, community, and divine protection. Another key element of everyday Roman religion was the belief in protective boundaries. Doorways, thresholds, property lines, and city gates all held spiritual significance. Crossing these boundaries required respect for the powers that guarded them. Small offerings were sometimes placed at gates or entrances to ensure safe passage or prevent harmful influences from entering. These customs reflected the broader Roman emphasis on order, stability, and the proper maintenance of space. The everyday religious life of Rome also connected families to larger events beyond their homes. Public festivals brought together thousands of people, but their significance extended into private life. Families prepared special meals, decorated homes, and visited temples. On some festivals, work ceased entirely, allowing time for worship and communal gatherings. These celebrations created a shared cultural calendar that reinforced unity across social classes, neighborhoods, and regions. As the Roman Republic expanded across Italy and the Mediterranean, it encountered a remarkable diversity of cultures, each with its own gods, rituals, and sacred customs. Rome's flexible religious system had long been capable of absorbing new deities, and the Romans prided themselves on their willingness to welcome foreign powers into their pantheon. Yet this openness had limits. When new cults spread too quickly, appeared too secretive, or seemed to challenge traditional norms, the Roman state responded with caution and sometimes with force. During the middle centuries of the Republic, a wave of new religious movements arrived in Rome from Greece and the eastern Mediterranean. These cults were different from the familiar household gods and state rituals that had shaped Roman life for generations. Many emphasized emotional experience, secret initiation, ecstatic worship, or direct personal connection with the divine. Their appeal cut across social classes, attracting slaves, freedmen, and sometimes even members of the elite. One of the earliest and most significant of these cults was that of Dionysus, known to the Romans as Bacchus. The cult of Bacchus originated in Greece, where the god of wine, ecstasy, and transformation inspired a wide range of rituals. Greek celebrations of Dionysus included dramatic festivals, processions, and rites that encouraged participants to transcend ordinary social boundaries. When the cult spread into southern Italy, it blended with local traditions among communities already familiar with agricultural festivals and seasonal celebrations. At first, the Romans did not view the cult of Bacchus as a threat. Like many foreign religions, it entered quietly, practiced mainly in local gatherings or rural areas. But over time, it grew more organized and widespread. Groups began meeting at night, holding initiations and ceremonies that included music, dance, and drinking. These gatherings offered emotional release in a society known for its discipline and formality. They attracted people who felt excluded from the more rigid structures of public religion. The Roman Senate grew suspicious when reports emerged that the Bacchic gatherings were expanding rapidly, involving large numbers of participants from different regions. Ancient Roman sources, most notably the historian Livy, described the Senate's concern that the cult's meetings encouraged behavior that violated social norms. Whether these accounts were exaggerated or based on misunderstandings is a matter of debate among modern scholars. However, the official response left a lasting mark on Roman religious history. In a dramatic move, the Senate launched an investigation into the Bacchanalia, the collective term for Bacchic celebrations. The resulting action, often called the Bacchanalian Affair, culminated in a decree that severely restricted the cult's activities. This decree, preserved in a bronze inscription known as the Senatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus, outlined strict regulations. It prohibited large gatherings, required state approval for any meetings, and banned certain forms of ritual behavior. The Senate's actions represented one of the first major attempts by the Roman state to regulate a foreign religious movement. The Romans were not opposed to new gods in principle. They had welcomed Greek deities, adopted Etruscan practices, and honored countless local spirits. But the Bacchanalia raised concerns because they appeared to bypass state authority. The secrecy of the meetings, the rapid growth of the cult, and the involvement of socially diverse participants all threatened the Roman ideal of public, supervised religious life. The crackdown on the Bacchanalia marked a turning point. It demonstrated that while Rome could integrate foreign gods, it insisted on controlling how they were worshipped. Religion remained a public matter, overseen by priests, magistrates, and the Senate. Any movement that operated outside these structures risked being labeled dangerous or subversive. The cult of Bacchus was not the only foreign religion to gain followers in Rome during this period. Another influential deity was Cybele, the great mother of the gods, known in Asia Minor as the Magna Mater. Her worship involved ecstatic rituals, music with drums and cymbals, and the presence of eunuch priests known as the Galli. The introduction of Cybele reflects a different pattern from the Bacchanalia because her arrival in Rome was state-sponsored. During the war against Carthage, the Romans sought divine support from many quarters. The Sibylline books advised that bringing the Great Mother to Rome would help secure victory. Following this guidance, Roman envoys traveled to the city of Pergamum, where they obtained a sacred stone believed to embody the goddess's presence. When the stone arrived in Rome, the city held a grand celebration to welcome her. This event demonstrated Rome's willingness to adopt a powerful foreign deity when it served the interests of the state. However, Cybele's worship created cultural tensions. The rituals associated with the Great Mother differed sharply from traditional Roman practices. The presence of eunuch priests, in particular, conflicted with Roman views of masculinity and social order. To manage these differences, the Roman state imposed limits. The Galli were permitted to perform their rites, but Roman citizens were forbidden from joining the priesthood. Public ceremonies involving the Great Mother became carefully controlled events, blending traditional Roman rituals with the dramatic elements of her Eastern worship. This pattern of partial acceptance continued as other foreign cults arrived. The worship of Isis, an Egyptian goddess associated with healing, magic, and protection, gained popularity among sailors, merchants, and laborers. Her cult offered personal comfort, emotional support, and a sense of community to individuals who often lacked strong social connections. Temples dedicated to Isis appeared in port cities and commercial districts across the Mediterranean. Yet the Roman state viewed the cult of Isis with suspicion, not because of its doctrines but because of its independence. The temples of Isis operated outside the official priesthoods, attracting large, diverse gatherings. Several times during the late Republic, Roman officials ordered the destruction of Isis temples within the city, yet each time her worship returned, driven by popular support. This cycle of suppression and resurgence reveals the growing complexity of Roman religious life as the Republic expanded. The city could no longer fully control the spiritual needs of its increasingly diverse population. Foreign cults offered something that traditional Roman religion often lacked: personal connection, emotional expression, and spiritual transformation. Traditional Roman worship focused on maintaining harmony between the state and the gods through public rituals. It did not emphasize personal salvation, inner revelation, or moral renewal. By contrast, many foreign cults promised individual benefits, health, protection, guidance, or a more intimate relationship with the divine. These offerings resonated with groups who felt overlooked by the formal structures of the Republic. Enslaved people, women, foreigners, and the urban poor often found foreign cults more welcoming than the rigid hierarchies of traditional religion. This appeal did not mean that Roman religion was failing. It still functioned effectively as a civic system. But the rise of foreign cults revealed the limits of a system rooted primarily in public duty rather than personal devotion. Another factor contributing to the spread of foreign cults was Rome's increasing presence across the Mediterranean. As soldiers, merchants, and officials traveled through Greece, Egypt, North Africa, and the Near East, they encountered new ideas and brought them home. Some adopted foreign gods as travel protectors. Others were introduced to mystery cults, groups that offered secret rites and promised deeper spiritual knowledge. The Roman acceptance of foreign gods also reflected pragmatic diplomacy. By honoring deities from conquered territories, Rome signaled its respect for local traditions, helping to maintain order across its expanding domains. Incorporating foreign gods made conquered peoples feel included in the spiritual community of the empire. This strategy supported Rome's broader goal of integrating diverse cultures under a unified political system. However, Rome's overarching principle remained constant. Religion must serve the stability of the state. Any cult, foreign or native, that threatened public order or bypassed official oversight could be restricted or banned. The Bacchanalian affair demonstrated this clearly. It became a model for how the Republic responded to perceived religious instability. The Senate's approach balanced openness with control, innovation with tradition. As the Roman Republic entered its final centuries, the balance between religion and politics began to shift in dramatic ways. What had once been a system centered on shared public rituals, priestly oversight, and collective responsibility slowly transformed into a battleground for individual ambition. Rome's leaders discovered that religion, long the stabilizing force of the Republic, could also be used as a tool for political influence, public image, and personal legitimacy. In this turbulent era, omens became arguments, priesthoods became prizes, and divine ancestry became political strategy. This shift did not happen overnight. It emerged gradually as Rome expanded into a vast Mediterranean power. Wealth flowed into the city, rivalries grew sharper, political competition intensified. Ambitious individuals began pushing the boundaries of tradition, and the religious system that once anchored the Republic became intertwined with the struggles that ultimately undermined it. One of the earliest and clearest signs of this transformation was the increasing use of augury and prodigy interpretation for political ends. In earlier centuries, augurs played a stabilizing role by providing divine approval or disapproval for public actions. But during the late Republic, augury became a tool that could delay elections, block legislation, or challenge the authority of rivals. If a magistrate announced that the gods had sent unfavorable omens, a political assembly might be dissolved. A proposed law could be postponed. A general's plans could be halted. These decisions were presented as matters of divine will, yet their timing often revealed political motives. Rome's leaders had learned that religion, because it carried the weight of tradition and moral authority, could serve as a powerful instrument in political contests. Some historians describe this period as one in which religion remained important but lost its innocence. Rituals continued, temples still stood, priests still performed ceremonies, but the meaning behind these actions grew more flexible, shaped by the needs of shifting political alliances. The role of priesthoods also changed significantly during the late Republic. High religious offices had always been prestigious, but now they became stepping stones to greater influence. The position of the Pontifex Maximus, for example, once held by elder statesmen who embodied continuity and tradition, became a coveted prize. The person who held this office controlled access to sacred knowledge, supervised major rituals, and influenced public perception of divine approval. The most famous example of this shift occurred when Julius Caesar pursued and won the office of Pontifex Maximus. Rather than waiting until he was older or more established, Caesar campaigned aggressively for the position while still relatively young. His election reflected both his popularity and the growing politicization of religion. As Pontifex Maximus, Caesar gained not only ceremonial authority, but also a public image of moral leadership. He used this position to enhance his standing and solidify his path toward greater power. Another way religion and politics became intertwined was through the interpretation of prodigies. Unusual events, lightning strikes, earthquakes, strange animal births, celestial phenomena, had always been taken seriously by Romans. They were signs that required ritual correction. But during the late Republic, the interpretation of prodigies became increasingly political. Supporters of one faction might argue that a disaster indicated the gods' displeasure with a rival. Opponents might claim that a victory proved divine favor. In a society that believed deeply in divine signs, these claims carried real weight. Public confidence could shift based on how prodigies were explained. Leaders learned that controlling the narrative around divine messages could bolster their authority or undermine their enemies. As political tensions rose, prodigy interpretations became part of the rhetorical arsenal used in debates and public speeches. The growing influence of foreign cults also played a role in the late Republic's religious politics. As Eastern religions gained popularity, some conservative Romans worried that traditional values were being eroded. They viewed these cults as symbols of cultural change, wealth, and moral uncertainty. Political leaders could exploit these concerns by promoting themselves as defenders of ancestral tradition or critics of foreign influence. Religion thus became a canvas for broader cultural conflicts. Yet, the most significant development of this period was the emergence of divine ancestry as a powerful political tool. Roman families had long traced their origins to mythical figures, but during the late Republic, this practice took on new intensity and new meaning. For ambitious leaders, claiming descent from a god or heroic ancestor offered a way to distinguish themselves from rivals and assert a unique place in the political order. The Julian family provides the most famous example. Members of this lineage asserted that they descended from Iulus, the son of Aeneas, and therefore from Venus herself. This claim connected them to the mythic origins of Rome and to the broader world of Greek heroic legend. Julius Caesar embraced this ancestry wholeheartedly. He commissioned temples and public works honoring Venus Genetrix, the ancestral goddess of his line. By doing so, he presented his political ambitions as part of a divine plan. This idea of divine ancestry took on even greater significance after Caesar's death. Following his assassination, signs reported in the sky, most famously a bright comet visible for several days, were interpreted by some Romans as proof that Caesar had been taken up among the gods. Whether or not the comet appeared exactly as later writers described, the political impact was clear. Caesar's supporters proclaimed him a god, calling him Divus Julius, or the Divine Julius. This moment marked a major turning point in Roman religious history. For the first time, a Roman leader had been publicly declared a god by the Senate. The act blurred the line between mortal authority and divine status. It set a precedent that future rulers would use to reinforce their power, particularly during the rise of the empire. The elevation of Caesar also transformed the political landscape for his heir, Octavian, later known as Augustus. By presenting himself as the son of a god, Octavian gained extraordinary legitimacy. His enemies were not just political opponents, they stood against the divine will. His claim helped secure loyalty among troops, support from the public, and recognition from the Senate. Religion had become not only a cultural foundation but also a tool for constructing new forms of political power. As the Republic collapsed into civil war, religion played a central role in shaping public perception of leaders like Mark Antony, Pompey, and others. Accusations of impiety, rumors of divine signs, and carefully orchestrated religious gestures all influenced public opinion. Leaders staged rituals to align themselves with particular gods. They built temples to commemorate victories. They sought omens to demonstrate divine support. These actions reflected the growing belief that political authority required not just military strength or eloquence, but also spiritual legitimacy. The late Republic also saw debates about the moral responsibilities of leaders in matters of religion. Philosophers and statesmen questioned whether the traditions of the ancestors were being upheld or whether personal ambition was undermining the sacred foundations of the city. Writers such as Cicero explored the proper role of religion in public life, arguing that religious authority needed to remain tied to communal well-being rather than personal gain. These debates show that Romans were aware of the delicate balance between religion as a shared cultural system and religion as a political instrument. When the long crisis of the late Republic finally came to an end, Rome stood exhausted. Civil wars had shattered political institutions, weakened trust, and blurred the boundary between sacred tradition and personal ambition. Into this fractured landscape stepped Augustus, the adopted son of Julius Caesar. His rise marked not only a political transformation, but also a profound reshaping of Roman religious life. Through careful reform, symbolic gestures, and deliberate strategy, Augustus redefined the relationship between the gods, the state, and the ruler himself. The result was a new religious system, one that preserved Rome's traditions on the surface, but reorganized them to support a single central authority. Augustus understood better than any of his predecessors that religion could unify a divided people. He recognized that the Republic's religious institutions, though weakened, still carried immense cultural weight. Rather than reject or replace them, he chose to restore, reorganize, and subtly reinterpret them. His approach combined reverence for ancestral customs with innovations that placed the emperor at the heart of Roman spiritual identity. One of Augustus's earliest and most symbolic acts was to present himself as the restorer of traditional religion. During the years of civil war, many temples had fallen into disrepair, rituals had been neglected, and priestly offices had gone unfilled. Augustus announced a sweeping program to repair or rebuild these sacred sites. Ancient writers recorded that he either restored or constructed dozens of temples throughout the city. These restorations were not merely architectural projects, they were public statements. Each rebuilt temple proclaimed that divine order, disrupted by years of conflict, was now returning under a new leader's guidance. By repairing the temples, Augustus visually connected himself to Rome's earliest kings and their role in shaping sacred institutions. In doing so, he positioned his rule as a continuation of Rome's most respected traditions rather than a break from them. The message was clear: the gods approved of this new era, and Augustus was their chosen steward. Augustus also restructured Rome's priesthoods. Many religious colleges had suffered during the turmoil of the late Republic, but Augustus revived them, filling vacant positions and expanding their responsibilities. He himself accepted the position of Pontifex Maximus after the office became available. Unlike Julius Caesar, who sought the role early in his career, Augustus waited until he was already firmly established as Rome's leader. His acceptance of the office symbolized stability rather than ambition. Under his guidance, priestly institutions regained prestige. The augurs, the flamens, the Vestal Virgins, and other priesthoods found new relevance in the social and ceremonial life of the capital. By strengthening these institutions, Augustus tied his rule to the authority of sacred tradition, making it difficult for future rivals to challenge him without appearing impious. Perhaps the most innovative aspect of Augustus's religious policy was his introduction of imperial cult practices. This development did not begin with Augustus's claim to divinity, but with the divine status granted to Julius Caesar after his death. Caesar's elevation as Divus Julius created a precedent unlike anything Rome had seen before. Augustus, as the son of the divine Julius, inherited not only political legitimacy, but also a unique religious standing. The imperial cult did not claim that Augustus was a god in the traditional sense within the city of Rome itself. Instead, it introduced several layers of sacred identity. In Rome, Augustus emphasized his genius, his protective spirit, rather than his person. Shrines and altars were dedicated to the genius Augusti, blending the older idea of household spirits with the new reality of imperial power. Roman citizens could honor the emperor's genius without violating traditions that prohibited treating a living man as a god. Outside Rome, however, the situation was different. In the provinces, especially in the eastern Mediterranean, ruler worship had a long history. The Greeks had often honored powerful leaders with divine titles, temples, and ceremonies. Augustus allowed provincial communities to worship him directly in this manner, provided such practices strengthened loyalty and did not conflict with Roman sensibilities. Temples dedicated to Rome and Augustus appeared in many cities, blending the worship of the emperor with that of the Roman state. This provincial worship served multiple purposes. It allowed newly incorporated regions to express loyalty through familiar forms of devotion. It reinforced the idea that the emperor stood at the center of a vast spiritual and political order. And it created unity across diverse cultures by directing religious reverence toward a shared figure. The imperial cult also influenced artistic representation. Images of Augustus cast him in youthful, idealized forms, often showing him performing rituals, leading ceremonies, or standing alongside gods. These depictions blended political authority with divine imagery. One famous example, the statue known as the Augustus of Prima Porta, shows him in military dress with a scene on his breastplate suggesting divine support for his victories. Such imagery strengthened the public perception that Augustus ruled with the approval of the gods. Augustus's religious reforms extended to the Roman calendar. He reorganized festivals and restored ceremonies that had fallen out of use. By doing so, he tied the rhythm of public life to the new order he was establishing. Festivals honoring traditional gods reinforced ancestral values, while new celebrations linked to Augustus and his family emphasized the emperor's place in Rome's continuing destiny. One significant addition was the festival celebrating the birthday of Augustus. While this did not replace older festivals, it provided a new focal point for civic unity. Across the empire, communities honored Augustus's birthday with games, processions, and offerings. These events reinforced the connection between the emperor and the spiritual well-being of the community. The role of Livia, Augustus's wife, also illustrates how the imperial family became integrated into religious identity. Livia was associated with ideals of domestic virtue, piety, and stability. Temples and altars sometimes honored her alongside traditional goddesses, presenting her as a living embodiment of Roman values. After her death, she too received divine honors, continuing the pattern of transforming members of the imperial family into sacred figures. The imperial cult did not erase traditional Roman religion. The gods of the early pantheon, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Minerva, and others, remained active in public worship. Temples continued to function, festivals were still observed, and priesthoods maintained their rituals. What changed was the structure through which divine favor was understood. The emperor became the primary mediator between the Roman people and the gods. His well-being symbolized the well-being of the state. His successes were signs of divine support. His person became a point of unity, binding together citizens across vast distances. This centralization of religious identity mirrored the political centralization of the empire. The republic's complex system of shared authority had been replaced by the leadership of one man, and the religious system adapted accordingly. The imperial cult provided a spiritual framework that supported the new political structure while maintaining continuity with the past. Augustus's religious settlement had lasting effects. Subsequent emperors inherited a system that granted them sacred status and ritual authority. Some used it cautiously, others pushed its limits. But the foundation Augustus laid endured for centuries, shaping the spiritual and political identity of the Roman Empire. With Augustus's reforms firmly established, Rome entered a new era in which the emperor became the symbolic center of both political and religious life. Yet Augustus himself exercised restraint in the way he navigated sacred honors. He preserved the appearance of ancestral tradition, avoided excessive claims, and framed his authority in terms of service rather than divinity. The rulers who followed him, however, approached the relationship between imperial power and the gods in their own ways. Some maintained the balance Augustus crafted, others pushed the boundaries, provoking public unease, political tension, or long-lasting transformations in Roman religious culture. The early empire, often called the Julio-Claudian period after the intertwined families that produced its first rulers, became a testing ground for the imperial cult. Each emperor inherited the religious settlement Augustus created, yet each confronted a different political climate, personal temperament, and set of expectations. As a result, the meaning of divine honor and the proper relationship between the emperor and the gods shifted from reign to reign. Tiberius, who succeeded Augustus, approached religious matters with caution. Known for his reserved personality and reluctance to embrace public ceremonial life, Tiberius avoided the kind of divine associations that had begun developing around Augustus. In Rome itself, he resisted titles that suggested personal divinity, honoring the principle that a living emperor should not be worshipped as a god. Instead, he maintained the traditional practice of encouraging devotion to the genius of the emperor rather than to his person. This stance reflected both his temperament and his desire to avoid appearing as though he sought excessive power in a city still sensitive to memories of monarchy. However, Tiberius also inherited an empire in which ruler worship was already common in the provinces. In Eastern cities with long-standing traditions of honoring kings as divine, communities continued to build temples and organize festivals in his name. Tiberius allowed these practices to continue, as they reinforced loyalty in distant regions, but he insisted that such honors remain outside the city of Rome. This careful balance mirrored Augustus's approach and helped preserve stability during his reign. The religious environment shifted dramatically under Gaius, more commonly known as Caligula. Caligula ascended the throne with widespread public goodwill, but his rule soon became associated with instability and controversial displays of sacred authority. Ancient sources describe him as a ruler who blurred the boundaries between mortal power and divine honors in ways that unsettled Roman society. Caligula embraced the idea of his own sacred status more openly than any emperor before him. He encouraged forms of worship that went beyond traditional devotion to the emperor's genius. Some accounts claim he asked to be addressed using divine titles, while others describe him appearing in public dressed as various gods such as Jupiter, Apollo, or even female goddesses. These actions were viewed as signs of arrogance by many Romans, though modern historians debate the accuracy of some ancient accusations. Still, the perception that Caligula sought to elevate himself above customary limits damaged his standing among elites and contributed to the atmosphere of tension that surrounded his assassination. Following Caligula's death, Claudius, his successor, restored a degree of moderation to imperial religious life. Claudius emphasized his role as a protector of traditional Roman customs and sought to revive older practices that he believed had been neglected. He restored priesthoods, reinvigorated festivals, and encouraged respect for ancestral rituals. He also demonstrated a strong interest in the religions of the provinces, particularly those of Gaul and the Eastern Mediterranean. His reign illustrates how emperors could influence religious life, not only by accepting honors, but also by acting as custodians of tradition. Claudius's involvement in provincial religion was relatively inclusive. He permitted certain local cults to flourish while restricting others he deemed problematic. His most notable intervention came in the regulation of the worship of Isis in Rome. While the cult of Isis had gained popularity among many Romans, Claudius sought to balance public order with religious diversity. Unlike earlier magistrates who had destroyed Isis temples, Claudius allowed the cult to continue under state supervision. This approach reflected the increasingly complex religious landscape of an empire that encompassed many peoples and traditions. Nero, who followed Claudius, brought yet another shift in imperial religious identity. Nero's reign began with optimism, but eventually became associated with instability and controversy. In religious matters, Nero displayed an interest in artistic performance, ceremony, and public spectacle. He participated in festivals, sponsored games, and promoted cultural expressions that blended artistic creativity with sacred symbolism. While these activities appealed to some segments of society, others felt they undermined traditional Roman virtues. The most significant religious controversy of Nero's reign relates to the devastating fire that destroyed much of Rome. Ancient writers claimed that Nero blamed the city's Christian communities for the disaster, subjecting them to harsh punishment. Although Christianity was still a small and largely misunderstood movement, Nero's actions brought it to wider public attention. This moment marked an early point of tension between the imperial government and a religious group that refused to participate in the imperial cult or traditional rituals. While Christianity remained a minor presence during Nero's lifetime, the conflict foreshadowed challenges that would grow in later centuries. After the Julio-Claudian period ended, the Flavian dynasty brought a new approach to imperial religion. Vespasian, the first Flavian emperor, sought to restore Rome's stability after the civil wars that followed Nero's death. He engaged directly with traditions that emphasized divine favor for the new ruling family. According to ancient accounts, oracles and omens were used to legitimize his rule, and he embraced these signs publicly. His reign demonstrates how divine approval became increasingly intertwined with claims to imperial authority during periods of political uncertainty. Vespasian's son Titus, who succeeded him, experienced a brief but eventful reign. He oversaw the completion of the Flavian amphitheater, known today as the Colosseum, and sponsored public festivals that displayed the grandeur of the empire. Although Titus accepted honors associated with the imperial cult, he avoided excessive divine claims, presenting himself as a benevolent ruler rather than a sacred figure. Domitian, the last of the Flavians, pushed imperial religious symbolism further. He adopted religious titles that emphasized his role as a divinely favored ruler and encouraged forms of address that linked him more closely to the gods. He also supported the worship of Jupiter and other deities, positioning himself as their chosen representative on Earth. Domitian's actions illustrate the continued evolution of the imperial cult, as emperors experimented with different degrees of sacred identity. Throughout the early empire, temples dedicated to deified emperors became a common feature of urban life. The worship of Divus Augustus, Divus Julius, and later deified rulers spread across Rome and the provinces. These temples functioned not only as religious sites but also as political symbols, reinforcing the idea that the emperor's authority was rooted in divine favor. At the same time, traditional gods remained active in public life. Jupiter continued to oversee civic ceremonies. Mars protected the legions. Minerva, Venus, and Apollo retained their roles in art, literature, and ritual. The presence of the imperial cult did not diminish the importance of the old gods. Rather, it added a new dimension to the Roman religious system. The emperor became the bridge connecting human society to the divine world, a figure who embodied Rome's destiny and prosperity. As the Roman Empire expanded across continents, its religious identity grew far more complex than anything the early republic could have imagined. Rome did not conquer empty land. It entered territories filled with ancient traditions, proud local deities, and deeply rooted ritual practices. Rather than impose a uniform religious system on its subjects, Rome developed a flexible approach that allowed local religions to survive and even flourish, so long as they did not threaten political stability. This openness produced one of the most distinctive features of Roman religious life: a vast and diverse mosaic of gods, symbols, and rituals woven together through adaptation and syncretism. Syncretism, the blending of religious traditions, was not something Romans theorized about. It emerged naturally from the empire's multicultural reality. As Roman officials, soldiers, merchants, and settlers interacted with local populations, they encountered deities who performed similar functions to their own gods. A god of war in Gaul might be linked to Mars. A goddess of healing in North Africa might be associated with Minerva. A powerful sky deity in Anatolia might be recognized as Jupiter. These identifications helped both Romans and provincial peoples understand one another's religious practices and build a shared spiritual vocabulary. This process did not erase local traditions. Instead, it created new forms of worship that blended Roman and regional elements. To explore this rich religious landscape, we can follow Rome's reach across different provinces, each offering unique contributions to the empire's spiritual world. In Gaul, located in regions that correspond to modern-day France and surrounding areas, local gods had long been honored in sacred groves, rivers, and springs. When Rome absorbed Gaul, it encountered deities with distinctive identities and functions. Rather than suppressing them, Roman authorities often adopted them. The result was the emergence of hybrid deities, such as Mercury combined with the Celtic god Lugus. This blended form became especially widespread. To the Romans, Mercury was the god of commerce, messages, and boundaries. Among Celtic peoples, Lugus played a similar role as a skilled, clever, and versatile deity. Their fusion created a figure who could be understood across cultures. Another example from Gaul is the goddess who became known as Minerva Sulis. In the region of what is now Britain, a local goddess presided over natural hot springs believed to possess healing powers. When the Romans built a major bath complex at the site the modern world calls Bath, they honored the goddess by identifying her with Minerva, Rome's goddess of wisdom and healing. This syncretism allowed both Roman officials and local inhabitants to participate in rituals that acknowledged the powers of Sulis while connecting her to the broader Roman pantheon. In North Africa, where Rome inherited rich religious traditions from Carthaginian and Berber cultures, syncretism took on different forms. Gods like Baal, Hammon, and Tanit were central to the region's spiritual life before Roman arrival. After Carthage fell and Africa Proconsularis became a Roman province, these deities did not disappear. Instead, they continued to be worshipped, often alongside Roman gods. Temples featured inscriptions combining Roman and local titles, showing that inhabitants felt comfortable honoring both sets of deities. The Roman Saturn, for instance, was identified with Baal Hammon. This connection made sense because both gods were associated with agriculture and the passage of time. The result was a blended figure who could be recognized by different cultural groups. In Egypt, Rome encountered one of the world's most sophisticated and ancient religious systems. Egyptian gods had distinctive stories, symbols, and artistic traditions that stretched back millennia. Yet Egypt also proved to be one of the most influential provinces in shaping Roman religion. Deities like Isis, Osiris, and Serapis captured Roman imagination. Isis, in particular, became widely popular far beyond Egypt's borders. As a goddess associated with healing, protection, motherhood, and magic, she offered something personal and emotionally resonant that many Romans found compelling. Roman devotees of Isis adopted Egyptian rituals, festivals, and iconography. Temples dedicated to her appeared in port cities, in urban centers, and even in Rome itself. While the state sometimes restricted or regulated her worship, the cult of Isis grew steadily. It appealed to a diverse audience. Sailors sought her protection on voyages, women looked to her for guidance in family life, and many individuals were drawn to her promise of spiritual comfort. This diffusion of Egyptian religion demonstrated the empire's capacity for absorbing distant traditions and making them part of everyday life. In the eastern provinces, particularly in Syria and Anatolia, local gods often held powerful and complex identities. Many Eastern traditions were built around city gods, each representing the pride, heritage, and autonomy of particular communities. When Rome arrived, it respected many of these deities, recognizing their political and cultural significance. Some Eastern gods became particularly popular among Roman soldiers stationed in frontier regions. Jupiter Dolichaeus, worshipped in a mountainous region of Anatolia, became a favored deity among legionaries. He was a storm god associated with strength, endurance, and protection, qualities ideal for military life. Temples dedicated to him appeared along frontier zones as far away as the Rhine and the Danube. In the western provinces, especially in Spain and the coastal regions of the Atlantic, local gods tied to nature, hunting, and agriculture survived under Roman rule. Shrines dedicated to deities of rivers, forests, and mountains continued to function, sometimes with Roman architectural features or Latin inscriptions added. These combinations show that local peoples did not abandon their traditions. Instead, they adapted them to fit within the broader Roman world. One of the most fascinating aspects of this syncretic system was the concept of the genius loci, the spirit of a place. Romans believed that every region, city, and landscape had its own protective spirit. This belief existed long before Rome expanded, but it gained new importance as the empire incorporated diverse territories. Local genii were honored alongside Roman gods, creating spiritual bridges between cultures. A provincial town might worship Jupiter in his Roman form while also honoring the genius of the city, often depicted as a figure holding local symbols. This shared practice gave Roman religion a sense of local grounding, even as it maintained an overarching imperial identity. Provincial elites played a major role in shaping this blended religious environment. Many local leaders adopted Roman customs to strengthen their political positions. Funding the construction of temples, sponsoring festivals, or serving as priests in syncretic cults allowed provincial elites to show loyalty to Rome while honoring local heritage. These activities also reinforced social cohesion, giving communities a way to affirm their identity within the empire. In some regions, local priesthoods evolved into influential civic institutions. For example, in the eastern provinces, priests of the imperial cult often held significant political authority. Serving as a priest of Rome and the emperor was a prestigious role that linked local leadership to the imperial center. This structure created a shared religious and political language across vast distances. Syncretism also extended into artistic and architectural forms. Temples in the provinces often blended Roman styles, such as columned porticos and stone altars, with local design elements. Sculptures depicted gods with hybrid attributes. An Anatolian storm god might be shown wearing Roman armor. A Celtic goddess might be portrayed using Roman artistic conventions, but holding symbols tied to local mythology. These visual expressions demonstrate how the empire created a unified cultural world without suppressing regional diversity. The everyday religious life of provincial communities also reflected this blending. Local festivals continued, but Roman holidays were added. Family altars included both native deities and Roman household gods. Soldiers stationed far from home often brought their own gods and introduced them to new regions, creating unexpected mixtures. A soldier from Gaul might worship a Celtic deity in a Syrian garrison, while a soldier from Egypt might introduce the cult of Isis to a frontier camp in Britain. This fluidity made the empire's religious system incredibly adaptable. It allowed Rome to govern a vast and varied population without imposing strict orthodoxy. Religion became one of the empire's most effective tools for integration. It created shared symbols, connected communities to Rome, and helped maintain stability. As the Roman Empire expanded and diversified, its religious life became increasingly complex. The traditional rituals inherited from early Roman history remained central to public life, but they did not address every spiritual need. Many people across the empire sought a more personal relationship with the divine, one that offered emotional connection, moral guidance, and hope for life after death. Within this environment, mystery religions flourished. These cults, originating from various corners of the Mediterranean and Near East, introduced new ways of understanding spirituality that differed sharply from Rome's public, civic-focused faith. Mystery religions were not defined by secrecy for its own sake, though secrecy was part of their practice. The term mystery comes from words meaning to close the eyes or the lips, reflecting the idea that certain truths were revealed only to initiates. These religions offered spiritual experiences not available in traditional Roman worship. Public religion emphasized ritual correctness, civic duty, and the protection of the state. Mystery religions emphasized inner transformation, personal commitment, and often the hope of a blessed life after death. One of the earliest and most influential of these cults was the worship of Isis and Osiris, which originated in ancient Egypt. While the cult of Isis had already reached Rome during the Republic, it expanded dramatically under the empire. Isis represented motherhood, healing, magic, and protection. Unlike many Roman deities, she was portrayed as deeply concerned with the lives of her followers. Her myths told of loyalty, suffering, and triumph over death, most famously in the story of how she revived her slain husband, Osiris. This narrative of death and rebirth resonated strongly with people seeking comfort in a world marked by uncertainty. Temples dedicated to Isis became spiritual centers for a wide range of social groups. Her cult attracted women, sailors, merchants, freedmen, and laborers, groups who often felt overlooked by traditional Roman structures. Initiates participated in elaborate rituals, including purification ceremonies, sacred meals, and processions featuring music and incense. These rites created a sense of belonging that transcended social boundaries. The cult's emotional appeal distinguished it from more formal Roman festivals. Another major mystery religion that spread widely throughout the empire was the cult of Mithras. Originating in the regions of Persia and adopted into Roman culture, Mithric worship became especially popular among soldiers. Mithras was depicted as a powerful, heroic figure who performed cosmic deeds, including a symbolic act of slaying a sacred bull. This act, shown in reliefs found in Mithraic temples across the empire, represented a divine sacrifice that brought renewal to the world. Mithraic temples, known as Mithraea, were small, cave-like structures designed to create an intimate atmosphere. Worshippers gathered in close quarters, a stark contrast to the large open spaces of traditional Roman temples. The cult required a series of initiation stages, each representing a deeper level of knowledge and commitment. This structure appealed to soldiers who valued discipline, hierarchy, and loyalty. Many Mithraea were discovered near military camps along frontier regions, indicating that the cult spread primarily through the legions. The Mithras cult also offered a strong sense of fellowship. Initiates dined together in ritual meals that symbolized unity and shared responsibility. While the cult did not openly challenge Roman traditions, its emphasis on exclusive membership and personalized devotion offered something new. It provided moral direction, spiritual guidance, and a promise of cosmic significance to individuals far from home. Another influential movement was the cult of Serapis, created during the Hellenistic period in Egypt as a fusion of Greek and Egyptian religious ideas. Serapis combined attributes of several gods, including Osiris, Apis, Zeus, and Hades. His worship appealed to Greeks living in Egypt and later spread throughout the Roman world. The cult emphasized healing and salvation, with temples functioning not only as places of worship but also as centers for medical care. Priests of Serapis often acted as healers, and sanctuaries associated with the god attracted pilgrims seeking cures for illness or relief from suffering. These mystery religions shared several key features that distinguished them from traditional Roman practices. First, they offered a sense of personal identity within a religious community. Initiates felt they belonged to a spiritual group that recognized individual worth beyond social status. Second, they provided teachings or sacred stories that explained the world in moral or philosophical terms. Unlike the practical rituals of Roman state religion, mystery cults encouraged followers to reflect on the nature of life, death, and the divine. Third, they promised some form of salvation or spiritual benefit, whether in this life or the next. This promise addressed a deep human desire that official Roman religion did not fully satisfy. The rise of mystery religions also reflected changing social conditions in the empire. Urbanization brought diverse populations into close contact. Soldiers served far from their homelands. Trade routes connected distant regions. These movements created opportunities for new ideas to spread. People exposed to foreign cultures began exploring alternatives to the customs of their ancestors. Mystery religions thrived in cosmopolitan environments, where traditions blended and new beliefs found receptive audiences. Philosophy also played a role in this transformation. Roman intellectuals, influenced by Stoicism, Epicureanism, and other schools of thought, increasingly sought moral frameworks that explained human behavior and provided ethical guidance. While mystery religions were not philosophical systems, they offered narratives that aligned with philosophical questions about the purpose of life and the afterlife. Some adherents found in these religions the emotional and symbolic depth that philosophy could not provide on its own. Despite their popularity, mystery religions sometimes aroused suspicion among Roman authorities. Their secretive nature made officials uneasy, as gatherings that were not publicly supervised could potentially foster dissent. Yet, most mystery religions did not challenge the state. They coexisted peacefully with traditional practices, and many initiates continued to participate in public rituals alongside their private devotion. The empire's tolerant approach allowed these cults to flourish, but it also drew lines that could not be crossed. Traditional Roman religion required participation in public rituals that honored the gods and the emperor. These rituals reinforced loyalty to the state. As long as mystery religions allowed their followers to participate in civic ceremonies, they were generally tolerated. Conflict arose only when groups refused to take part in state rituals, a tension that became significant later with the growth of Christianity. It is important to note that mystery religions did not attempt to replace Rome's traditional gods. Instead, they offered alternative paths for individuals seeking deeper spiritual experience. A Roman citizen might honor Jupiter during public festivals, maintain a household shrine to the Lares and Penates, and participate in the rites of Isis, Mithras, or Serapis. This layered approach to spirituality was typical in the empire and reflected a worldview that saw no contradiction in honoring multiple deities for different purposes. As the Roman Empire matured, its religious life became increasingly rich and varied. Traditional rituals remained central to public identity, while foreign cults and mystery religions offered new paths to personal spiritual experience. Yet, alongside these practices existed another powerful force: philosophy. Roman thinkers, poets, and statesmen engaged deeply with questions about the nature of the gods, the meaning of myth, and the proper role of religion in civic and private life. Their reflections created an intellectual dimension to Roman religion, one that shaped how myths were understood, how rituals were justified, and how individuals navigated the increasingly complex spiritual landscape of the empire. Roman engagement with philosophy began long before the empire. Contact with Greek culture during the Republican period introduced Romans to the ideas of major philosophical schools, including Stoicism, Epicureanism, Platonism, and Aristotelian thought. But it was during the empire that these philosophical traditions became fully integrated into Roman intellectual life. Educated Romans studied Greek texts, attended philosophical lectures, and debated questions about nature, ethics, and divinity. This intellectual engagement did not replace traditional religion. Instead, it provided new ways of interpreting it. One of the central tensions Roman thinkers grappled with was the nature of the gods themselves. Traditional Roman religion emphasized ritual correctness, community cohesion, and the maintenance of divine order. It did not require belief in myths as literal truth. As a result, many Roman intellectuals felt free to reinterpret myths symbolically or question them openly. They viewed myth not as a rigid narrative, but as a cultural inheritance that could be understood on multiple levels. Stoicism, one of the most influential schools in Rome, played a major role in shaping intellectual views of the divine. Stoic philosophers taught that the universe was governed by a rational and providential force often identified as the Logos. According to Stoic thought, the gods represented aspects of this rational order. Jupiter, for example, could be understood not as a literal sky god throwing thunderbolts, but as a symbolic expression of universal reason and justice. Mars might represent the natural forces of conflict and struggle that drove human growth. Minerva could be interpreted as the divine manifestation of wisdom and practical intelligence. For many Stoics, mythological stories were allegories, poetic ways of expressing philosophical truths. This approach allowed them to participate in traditional rituals while maintaining a more abstract understanding of divinity. Seneca, one of the most prominent Roman Stoics, wrote about the importance of participating in public ceremonies for the sake of social harmony, even if one understood the gods in a philosophical sense. He argued that myths were valuable not because they were literally true, but because they taught moral lessons and connected individuals to the community. Epicureanism offered a very different perspective. Epicureans believed that the gods existed, but were completely removed from human affairs. In their view, the gods lived in perfect tranquility, unconcerned with prayers, sacrifices, or rituals. Because the divine was indifferent, human beings should not fear divine punishment or expect divine intervention. Epicureans viewed myths as human inventions, creative stories born from the need to explain natural phenomena or grapple with fears about death and fate. Lucretius, the great Epicurean poet, expressed these ideas in his long philosophical poem On the Nature of Things. He criticized superstition and warned against the anxiety caused by misunderstood religious beliefs. Yet even Epicureans did not advocate abandoning Roman traditions entirely. Many continued to participate in public rituals for social or political reasons, distinguishing between personal belief and civic duty. Platonism and later Neoplatonism introduced another intellectual framework for interpreting Roman religion. Platonic thinkers believed in a hierarchy of spiritual beings, with a supreme divine principle at the top and various lesser deities or spirits below. This approach allowed them to view the traditional gods as intermediaries, manifestations of deeper metaphysical truths. For Platonists, myths encoded symbolic lessons about the soul, the cosmos, and the journey toward understanding. Allegory became an essential tool for interpreting these stories. Plutarch, a Greek thinker influential in Roman circles, wrote essays analyzing myths and rituals in philosophical terms. He suggested that stories about gods could be read as reflections of natural forces or ethical struggles. This intellectual approach made myth flexible, allowing it to adapt to changing cultural and philosophical contexts. Roman poets also shaped the intellectual interpretation of the gods. Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, presented myth as a vast tapestry of transformation and change. While his stories were playful and imaginative, they also conveyed insights about human nature, the power of fate, and the fluidity of the divine world. Virgil, in his epic poem about Aeneas, used myth to explore themes of duty, destiny, and the moral responsibilities of leadership. Through literature, myth became a tool for exploring human experience rather than simply recounting sacred tales. Another significant dimension of Roman intellectual life was the critique of superstition. Many Roman thinkers admired religious tradition but distinguished it from irrational fear. Cicero, both a statesman and philosopher, questioned certain forms of divination and criticized those who exploited religion for personal gain. He defended the importance of civic religion while warning against excessive credulity. His writings reveal a society that valued religious practice but also encouraged critical reflection. Despite these philosophical interpretations and critiques, Roman religion retained its essential character as a system of public ritual. Intellectual debates rarely challenged the legitimacy of the traditional gods. Instead, they offered new ways of understanding them. Romans could interpret Jupiter as a metaphor for cosmic order while still participating in festivals honoring him. They could view myths allegorically without abandoning temple rituals or sacrifices. Philosophy enriched Roman religion without replacing it. This dual system, traditional rituals supported by philosophical interpretation, allowed the Roman religious landscape to accommodate both everyday practices and complex intellectual thought. It created a space where myth could be simultaneously symbolic, poetic, and culturally binding. It also helped maintain religious unity in an empire defined by diversity. Philosophical interpretation had political implications as well. Emperors and statesmen drew on philosophical ideas to present themselves as morally upright rulers guided by reason and duty. Augustus, for example, cultivated an image of moderation and harmony consistent with Stoic ideals. Later emperors, particularly those admired by intellectuals, were praised for aligning their rule with philosophical virtues. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor known for his devotion to Stoicism, became an enduring symbol of philosophical leadership. Although he lived centuries after the earliest religious traditions had taken shape, he represented the blending of political authority and philosophical thought that characterized the mature Roman Empire. However, philosophy did not always support the existing order. Some thinkers questioned the morality of traditional myths or pointed out contradictions between ritual practice and ethical teaching. While these critiques did not lead to widespread reform, they contributed to broader conversations about the purpose and meaning of religion. In some cases, these questions influenced individuals who later turned to alternative spiritual paths, including the emerging Christian movement. As the Roman Empire moved into the 3rd century of its history, new pressures began reshaping both its political structure and its religious identity. Earlier centuries had seen the steady blending of traditions, the rise of personal devotion through mystery religions, and the careful balance of imperial cult practices. But the period now known as the crisis of the 3rd century brought challenges that pushed Roman religion into new territory. Civil wars, economic turmoil, foreign invasions, epidemics, and shifting social structures created widespread uncertainty. In this environment, people sought forms of worship that provided stability, security, and universal meaning. The result was a religious landscape marked by competition, innovation, and an increasing focus on powerful, all-encompassing deities, especially sun gods with universal reach. These developments did not replace older traditions overnight. Instead, they added new layers to an already complex spiritual world. Traditional deities remained important, especially in local and civic contexts. But a growing number of people across the empire turned toward cults that offered broader explanations for the troubles facing their world. These new movements emphasized themes of unity, cosmic order, and salvation, qualities that resonated deeply during a time of upheaval. One of the most influential religious shifts of this period was the rise of solar worship. Sun gods existed in many cultures long before the crisis, but during the 3rd century they took on new prominence and new interpretations. The sun had always been a universal symbol, seen by all, crossing borders, illuminating every land. In a fractured empire, a universal symbol held immediate appeal. Among the Romans themselves, the figure of Sol, the sun god, gained increasing importance. Sol had been present in Roman religion since earlier times, but he had never stood at the center of the pantheon. That began to change as soldiers, officials, and common people embraced solar symbolism. The sun, with its reliability and life-giving force, seemed to embody stability in a world often lacking it. As the empire encountered Eastern religions, ideas about sun worship grew even more varied and dynamic. One example of this Eastern influence came from the cult of Mithras, which, although not technically a sun cult, featured strong solar symbolism. Mithras was often depicted dining with Sol or performing acts in coordination with the sun. Initiates saw Mithras as a mediator between humanity and cosmic forces, and these themes prepared the ground for broader solar movements. Soldiers, who faced constant danger and mobility, found comfort in the idea of a divine power that transcended local boundaries. Another influential figure emerged during the reign of the Emperor Elagabalus, originally a priest from Emesa in Syria. His hometown deity, often called Elagabal, was a powerful sun god whose worship involved sacred rites and honored a holy black stone believed to embody the god's presence. When this young ruler ascended the imperial throne, he attempted to elevate his native god to the center of Roman religious life. He introduced the cult of Elagabal to Rome, brought sacred objects into the city, and tried to reorganize the imperial pantheon around this Eastern sun deity. These efforts were met with resistance from the Roman elite, who viewed them as disrespectful to traditional customs. After Elagabalus's death, his reforms were reversed, and the foreign god's influence diminished. Yet his experiment revealed a broader truth. Solar worship had begun entering the Roman imagination in new and powerful ways. Even though Elagabalus's personal project failed, the idea of a supreme sun god did not disappear. The most significant development in this direction occurred under the Emperor Aurelian, who came to power in the aftermath of prolonged civil war. Aurelian faced an empire divided by rival claimants, threatened by invasions, and shaken by economic weakness. In his effort to restore unity, he turned to a universal religious symbol, the sun. Aurelian officially established the cult of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, as a central religious institution of the empire. He built a massive temple in the capital, dedicated state-sponsored priests to its service, and declared that the unconquered sun watched over Rome. This step was more than a religious gesture. It was a political strategy. Aurelian believed that a universal deity, honored across all provinces, could help unify a fractured empire. Sol Invictus served as a symbol of resilience and continuity, qualities that Aurelian wanted to associate with his rule. Coins minted during his reign depicted the sun god as a powerful, radiant figure standing beside the emperor or embracing him, signaling divine partnership. The sun's eternal movement across the sky mirrored the stability Aurelian hoped to restore. The rise of Sol Invictus illustrates a broader trend, the move toward universal deities who could embody the empire's desire for unity. Traditional Roman religion, with its countless local gods and civic rituals, had always been decentralized. While this diversity was a strength, it could not easily address crises that affected the entire empire. Solar worship, by contrast, offered a single divine figure visible to all peoples. The 3rd century also saw increased philosophical reinterpretation of the divine in universal terms. Intellectuals influenced by Neoplatonism spoke of a single ultimate principle or divine source from which all other gods derived. This approach did not reject the pantheon, but reorganized it into a hierarchy. The supreme god was understood as the highest reality, with other gods functioning as intermediaries. This way of thinking aligned naturally with the rise of sun cults and created an intellectual foundation for monotheistic tendencies. These philosophical ideas influenced religious practice. Temples and inscriptions from the period often depict the sun as the supreme guide of the cosmos. Some inscriptions blend titles from different cultures, identifying the sun god with Zeus, Helios, Mithras, or Sol. This fluidity reflected a spiritual environment in which people sought universal truths that transcended regional traditions. It also demonstrated Rome's remarkable flexibility in redefining the divine world. As universal deities gained prominence, traditional cults continued to operate, but their role shifted. They remained important for local identity, civic life, and cultural continuity, yet they no longer dominated the spiritual imagination. Festivals honoring Jupiter, Mars, Minerva, and others still drew crowds, but the emotional and philosophical center of Roman religion increasingly gravitated toward broader cosmic ideas. The 3rd century also introduced new tensions. With so many religious options, competition among cults intensified. Mystery religions promised salvation and rebirth. Provincial gods offered local protection. Philosophers preached about a supreme principle. The imperial cult emphasized loyalty to the emperor. Solar worship promised unity. This diversity was not inherently destabilizing, but in a time of political and social crisis, it contributed to debates about which gods held true power and which forms of worship could best protect the empire. Amid this competition, some individuals and groups began to reject the multiplicity of gods altogether. While traditional polytheism allowed for flexibility, the philosophical and spiritual trends of the era encouraged some people to seek a single, all-powerful deity. This inclination did not yet dominate Roman religion, but it foreshadowed major changes on the horizon. The rise of these universal cults also affected the meaning of emperor worship. Under the imperial cult established by Augustus, the emperor's role was symbolic and civic rather than divine in the strictest sense. But as universalistic ideas spread, the emperor's spiritual identity also evolved. The association between the emperor and the sun strengthened, with artists often depicting the emperor wearing a radiant crown or standing alongside Sol Invictus. This imagery suggested that the emperor ruled with cosmic endorsement. The sun's eternal cycle mirrored the emperor's claim to bring order out of chaos. By the time Rome entered the later centuries of its imperial history, the religious environment had become a vast and complicated tapestry. Traditional gods continued to receive public honors. Mystery cults offered emotional and spiritual comfort. Philosophical traditions found meaning in universal principles, and new cosmic deities, especially solar gods, reflected the empire's search for unity during crisis. Within this spiritual mosaic, Christianity began as a small, regional movement. Yet over time, it grew into one of the most influential religious forces in the Roman world. Its rise profoundly challenged the assumptions that had shaped Roman religion for centuries, setting into motion the gradual decline of the old gods. Christianity emerged in the eastern provinces, rooted in Jewish traditions that emphasized monotheism, moral law, and the expectation of divine intervention in human history. Christians believed that Jesus of Nazareth had fulfilled these traditions, providing a path to salvation through faith, teaching, and the promise of resurrection. The early Christian message appealed to diverse groups: urban poor, freed slaves, women, merchants, and even some members of the educated classes. Its teachings offered a sense of moral clarity, personal hope, and communal belonging that contrasted sharply with the ritual-focused public religion of the Roman state. Crucially, Christianity rejected the idea of multiple gods. This monotheistic stance placed it in tension with Roman religious expectations, which required participation in public rituals to maintain harmony between the state and the divine realm. Traditional Roman religion did not demand exclusive loyalty. A person could honor Jupiter, Minerva, or Mars while also venerating Egyptian, Greek, or local deities. Roman religious life was inclusive, flexible, and civic-minded. Christianity, by contrast, asked its followers to reject the worship of all other gods. This refusal to participate in rituals dedicated to Rome's deities or to the emperor created conflict. From the Roman perspective, refusal to honor state gods threatened the stability and protection of the community. Religious rituals were seen as part of the social contract. They reinforced loyalty, signaled respect for tradition, and symbolized unity across a diverse empire. Christians, however, viewed participation in these rituals as a violation of their faith. Their devotion to one universal God meant they could not offer sacrifices at temples or swear oaths invoking traditional deities. The first Christian communities existed quietly for decades, meeting in private homes and maintaining small networks of believers. Roman officials were aware of their existence, but did not view them as a major threat. Many early accusations against Christians stemmed from misunderstandings about their gatherings, rituals, and refusal to honor traditional gods. In some regions, local hostility arose when Christians were seen as disrespecting community traditions or refusing to participate in civic festivals. As Christian numbers grew, so did Roman concern. The empire relied on shared public rituals to maintain cohesion. Any movement that separated itself from these ceremonies could appear defiant or destabilizing. This perception intensified during times of crisis, especially when plagues, wars, or political turmoil shook public confidence. When hardship struck, Romans often interpreted it as a sign that the gods were offended. A community refusing to honor the gods could be viewed as a source of divine anger. The first significant wave of persecution occurred under the Emperor Nero. After a catastrophic fire devastated large sections of the capital, Nero faced public suspicion that he had mishandled the disaster. To deflect blame, he accused the Christian community of wrongdoing. The resulting crackdown was brutal, though limited mainly to the capital. Nero's actions were not part of an empire-wide policy, but did mark the first moment when Christians became a targeted group at the imperial level. Later, emperors took varying approaches to Christianity. Some ignored the movement entirely. Others enforced local laws requiring participation in sacrifices. One of the most notable interactions occurred under the Emperor Trajan, who responded to a governor's inquiry about how to deal with Christians. Trajan advised against actively hunting them, but insisted that if Christians refused to renounce their faith and perform sacrifices when officially questioned, they must be punished. This policy reflected a broader Roman attitude. Christianity was not illegal as a belief system, but became a problem when it challenged public ritual obligations. For many decades, Christianity remained a minority faith, yet its numbers steadily increased. Christian communities formed social networks that offered support to the poor, care for the sick, and a sense of belonging that appealed to many in an empire marked by inequality and instability. Christian texts, teachings, and missionaries helped the movement spread across cities, including major urban centers like Alexandria, Carthage, Antioch, and eventually Rome itself. Christianity's internal organization also contributed to its resilience. Leaders known as bishops guided local communities, while traveling teachers and preachers spread messages across the provinces. Ancient sources mention figures such as Paul, whose letters and missionary journeys helped shape early Christian doctrine and expand its reach. Though this activity occurred far from the corridors of political power, it laid the groundwork for a religion that would eventually transform the empire. Over time, Christianity's refusal to participate in the imperial cult became one of its defining features. The imperial cult was not simply about honoring the emperor, it represented loyalty to the Roman state and its divine protection. When Christians refused to perform sacrifices to the emperor's genius or the gods of Rome, they were seen not only as religious dissenters, but also as political outsiders. Their refusal, rooted in conscience and faith, appeared to challenge the unity of the empire. This tension escalated during the later 3rd century, when emperors like Decius and Valerian issued edicts requiring all inhabitants of the empire to perform sacrifices for the well-being of the state. These edicts were not aimed at Christians specifically, but Christians were disproportionately affected because they refused to comply. Some Christians chose to flee, others went into hiding, and many suffered imprisonment or death. These episodes became central to Christian memory, creating a tradition of martyrs whose courage strengthened the movement's identity. Despite these persecutions, Christianity grew. Its moral teachings, communal structure, and promise of salvation appealed to many who found little comfort in the civic religion of the empire or in the increasingly competitive world of mystery cults. Moreover, Christianity's monotheistic worldview aligned with broader intellectual trends that favored universal principles. Philosophers and theologians debated the nature of God, often drawing on ideas from Platonism or Neoplatonism that emphasized a single divine source. Such ideas helped Christian thinkers articulate their beliefs within the broader intellectual world of the empire. As Christianity expanded, the old gods began to lose their dominant role in public life. Temples remained active, festivals continued, and priesthoods performed their duties. But the old system no longer possessed the same hold over the spiritual imagination of the people. The diversity of cults, the rise of universal deities, and the influence of philosophical monotheism had already pushed Roman religion toward new directions. Christianity occupied a growing space in that shifting world. By the early 4th century of Roman history, the empire stood at a crossroads. Christianity had grown from a small provincial sect into a widespread and increasingly organized religious movement. Traditional Roman religion remained embedded in civic life, but its role had changed. The old gods were no longer the unquestioned pillars of Roman identity, and the vast array of cults across the empire created a religious landscape defined by diversity rather than unity. Into this environment stepped Constantine, a ruler whose decisions would radically transform the religious future of Rome and reshape the meaning of its ancient mythology. Constantine's rise to power came during a period of political fragmentation, civil conflict, and administrative reform. The empire had been divided among rival claimants, and the need for unity was urgent. The context for Constantine's engagement with Christianity began not with theology, but with politics and military strategy. According to later accounts, Constantine experienced a vision or sign before a decisive battle, which he interpreted as divine guidance. While the details of this event vary across sources, what matters is the lasting effect. Constantine adopted Christian symbols for his army and emerged victorious. This moment became a foundational story for Christian memory, but its political implications were equally significant. Constantine did not immediately outlaw the old gods, nor declare Christianity the official religion. Instead, he issued the Edict of Milan jointly with the Emperor Licinius. This decree granted religious toleration to all faiths in the empire, including Christianity. Although this edict did not grant Christianity special legal status, it marked a turning point by ending official persecution and signaling imperial favor toward Christian communities. Constantine's support for Christianity included returning confiscated property, funding the construction of churches, and granting privileges to Christian clergy. These actions strengthened Christian institutions materially and symbolically. At the same time, Constantine continued to use traditional Roman religious symbols and participate in certain older rituals. In public monuments, coinage, and official ceremonies, references to the sun god and other established deities continued for years. This does not indicate confusion, but rather reflects the transitional nature of the period. Constantine governed a population that still honored multiple gods, and he needed to balance innovation with continuity. His religious policies were gradual, not abrupt. Despite this balancing act, Constantine's reign marked a major shift in the empire's religious orientation. Christian bishops gained influence at court. New churches rose in major cities, including Rome, Constantinople, Antioch, and Jerusalem. Christian writings and theological debates received imperial attention. Over time, Christian moral and social values began to shape imperial legislation. Although Constantine himself was baptized only near the end of his life, his reign provided the essential infrastructure for Christianity to become a dominant force in imperial governance. Under Constantine's successors, the relationship between the empire and traditional Roman religion grew more strained. Some emperors attempted to return to older practices, but these efforts were limited. The most notable attempt came during the reign of the Emperor Julian, often called Julian the Apostate by Christian writers. Julian sought to revive the old gods and restore the prestige of traditional cults. He reopened temples, reinstated priesthoods, and encouraged philosophical interpretations of Roman mythology. Julian admired Neoplatonism and believed that the ancient gods represented profound truths. His revival was thoughtful, not reactionary, an attempt to create a philosophically grounded form of pagan leadership. Yet Julian faced significant obstacles. Christianity had already developed strong institutional structures, while traditional Roman religion lacked centralized organization. The old gods were honored in diverse regional forms that resisted unification. Julian's efforts ended with his death, and the religious direction of the empire returned to the path established under Constantine. The final major turning point in Roman religious history came during the reign of Theodosius I, who ruled in the later 4th century. Theodosius took decisive steps that transformed Christianity from a tolerated religion into the official creed of the empire. He issued decrees that prohibited public sacrifices, banned visits to pagan temples for worship, and placed severe restrictions on traditional cult practices. While these laws did not erase the old religion instantly, they marked its legal and social decline. Temples across the empire faced different fates. Some were closed or repurposed as Christian churches. Others fell into disuse as funding ceased and priestly offices disappeared. A few temples survived as cultural landmarks rather than active places of worship. The goddess Vesta's sacred fire, maintained for centuries by the Vestal virgins, was extinguished. The priesthood that had preserved Rome's oldest rituals ceased to function. These changes represented not just a shift in religious practice, but a profound alteration of Roman cultural memory. The old gods, whose stories had shaped Roman thought for centuries, did not vanish entirely. Instead, they transitioned into a new role within Christian society. Christian writers reinterpreted the gods as allegories, poetic symbols, or even demons. Philosophers and scholars viewed the myths as cultural artifacts that revealed insights into human nature or historical memory. Artists continued to depict mythological themes in mosaics, sculptures, and manuscripts, not as acts of worship, but as expressions of classical heritage. This transformation marked the beginning of the afterlife of Roman mythology. The gods who once watched over the city's fields, homes, and armies now lived in literature, art, and cultural imagination. Their temples might have been quiet, but their stories did not fade. Roman mythology survived the end of its religious functions because it was deeply embedded in education, artistic expression, and intellectual discourse. Christian theologians engaged with these myths in creative ways. Some used them to illustrate moral lessons. Others contrasted them with Christian teachings to highlight differences in worldview. Classical literature, including the works of Virgil and Ovid, continued to be read by educated Christians, though often with commentary that reframed mythological stories within Christian ideology. In everyday life, traditional rituals gradually lost their meaning, but echoes persisted. Festivals that once honored Roman gods were repurposed as civic or seasonal celebrations. Local customs adapted to Christian calendars. The integration of classical imagery into Christian art softened the transition between old and new religious systems. For example, early Christian mosaics sometimes used imagery of the vine, the shepherd, or the radiant sun, symbols that had earlier associations with Roman deities and mystery cults. By the early medieval period, the gods of ancient Rome belonged more to memory than to living practice. Yet their legacy endured. They inspired writers in the Renaissance, fueled artistic revival, informed political symbolism, and shaped modern storytelling. From paintings to poetry, from astronomy to literature, the names and stories of Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and countless others continued to carry meaning long after their temples crumbled. The journey of Roman mythology, from the early noumena of the Italian countryside to the richly developed pantheon of the Republican Empire, and finally into the realm of cultural heritage, reflects the profound adaptability of Roman society. The old gods evolved as Rome itself evolved. They absorbed Greek narratives, adapted to imperial politics, blended with local traditions, and survived the rise of new religions. In the end, Roman mythology did not disappear. It transformed. Its stories outlived its temples. Its gods faded as objects of worship, but persisted as symbols, metaphors, and artistic inspiration. The transition from a living religious system to a cultural memory marks not an ending, but a continuation. One that has shaped Western thought, language, and imagination for centuries. With this final transformation, the story of Roman mythology comes full circle. Born from ancient beliefs, reshaped by empire, challenged by new faiths, and preserved across generations as one of the most enduring mythological traditions in human history.